across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
And good afternoon. Yes, welcome to the home of common sense. We've got a shed load of savoury delights on the way for the next 3 hours. You will now be more than aware of the story of the French police. I mean, tell us something we didn't know. French police standing by watching around 1,000 migrants set sail for Britain yesterday. This is just hours after Andy Burnham said the small boats plan was working just fine, thanks, me love. Yeah, right. Details to come. On the issue of immigration, what is Britain's next move on this? What is Britain's next move? Also this afternoon, Kemi Badenoch has defended her pledge to scrap net zero, insisting the 2050 target is a political fiction bankrupting the country. She is bang on about that. Are the Tories going to be leading the way on climate change? And a major new report warns Britain's white population has fallen from almost 90% in 2000 to around 70% today, with the author David Goodhart arguing that wanting to preserve a majority white Britain doesn't make you a bigot. We'll speak to him a little later in the programme. Loads to get through. We'll bring you every single thing you need to know. And, of course, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. You can drop us a voice note there as well. You kind of bypass the queue by doing that, or you can message 87222. So let's start here. And don't worry, because you heard it from the Prime Minister himself, nothing to see here.
The Home Secretary has brought forward a very rigorous plan in relation to this. And let's remember, of course, the numbers can fluctuate, but overall, boat crossings are down quite significantly year on year. So that does suggest that the plan is working.
No, it doesn't. Not really. If 1,000 people can float over the channel on a rubber boat, it ain't working, Prime Minister. For years we've been told, of course, that France is our indispensable partner in stopping small boats. We've handed over hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money, signed agreement after agreement, summit after summit, and yet the pictures remain exactly the same. Overloaded dinghies leaving French beaches while the police often appear to stand by, apparently powerless, I would say unwilling, to stop them. Whatever the legal explanations, to the British public, that looks like failure. In fact, let's call it for what it is. It is failure, a very expensive failure. This week, the shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp went to northern France. He thought, I keep reading about this stuff, I'll go down, have a bit of a gander for myself, confronting reality that so many people watching from Britain find impossible to understand. Let's have a listen.
Why have you allowed the migrants into the water? Why haven't you stopped them?
Our order is to let them go like that.
Your order is to let them go?
We just have to say to them, don't do that, it's dangerous.
We just have to say to them, don't do that. I mean, I love this. What's the policy of the French in stopping the boats? We just have to say, don't do that. Brilliant. That's genius, right? If that is what success looks like, I would hate to see failure. The truth is brutally simple. Britain is paying, France is promising, but the boats are still sailing. Every successful crossing sends another message to criminal gangs and to migrants that the system can be beaten. Every launch undermines confidence in our border security. Every cheque written to Paris demands one very obvious question. What exactly are we giving you this money for? I want you to have a listen to this as well, the Talk exclusive. You might have heard a little bit of this earlier. The reporter Christian Drogan also went down to Calais to see for himself.
Dinghy's stuck. The dinghy's stuck. Looks like they've just got it going again now. We managed to get a load of people off, bail the water out and push it. Seems like they're going. Seems like they've got it going. But yeah, big chopper there. Putting the big lights on for them so they can see where they're going. Not sure what the warship's doing out there, not a bloody great deal. Well, probably wait to take it back over, actually, but yeah, look at that thing. shining its lights down there. The blue lights everywhere, fire brigade, ambulances, police, you know, wild scenes. And guess what? All this so they can invade our country.
It's not going to be that long before we get kind of Eurostar-esque announcements. The dinghy on Wave 1 is the 1320 to Dover. Mind the gap. I wonder if that is just it's just bizarre. We just have to say to them, don't do that. I love the thinking. Excuse the French accent. Enough excuses, of course. Enough carefully worded diplomatic statements from Home Secretaries and Prime Ministers. If the French authorities cannot or will not deliver results they promised, then Britain should stop writing blank cheques and demanding measurable outcomes before another penny is handed over. In a story like this, actions matter, results matter. Right now, the results are not good enough. The French say we've stopped 47,000 people crossing the channel. There's 1,000 yesterday. There was nearly that the day before. I know the weather's good, but come on. Is that meant to be success? What is Britain's next move on this story? 0344 499 1000. Meanwhile and elsewhere...
Well, he did say one very good thing. He said he's going to open up North Sea oil. If he does that, you're going to be a wealthy country, if he does it reasonably. And if the United Kingdom would use it, they'd be a wealthy country again.
President Trump talking about drilling, baby drilling. Kemi Badenoch has pitched in on the wider issue of climate, and she's right, by the way, because she's separated two very different arguments. Climate change, OK? We know climate change is real. Nobody denies climate change. Look at the planet. Look at our summers. Yes, it's got hotter. The evidence of warming the planet or the planet warming is overwhelming. But believing that doesn't automatically mean every net zero policy is sensible, affordable or achievable, or even logical. The UK's share of global emissions is small, and by the way, it's shrinking. Meanwhile, countries like China and India continue to build coal-fired power stations and increase emissions. If Britain cripples its own industry with soaring energy costs and silly deadlines, what is achieved by that? Manufacturing simply moves overseas, emissions are exported, British workers pay the price. Net zero has become less of an environmental strategy and more of a political slogan. You've only got to listen to the likes of Miliband and co and his successor wheel this one out. We've got to achieve net zero. Badenoch is saying her point is that targets should be rooted in economic reality, technological progress and what voters can actually afford. She is 100% correct. We ain't denying climate change. We're denying the evangelism that is net zero, that is costly and becoming more unaffordable by the hour. Will the Conservatives lead the way on this debate, do you think? 0344 499 1000. Peter Barnes is with us. We've got a load to discuss, Peter. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
By the way, I mean, let's just talk about this channel thing. It's quite... Look, we always use this example. You know, if you put this in a sitcom or a drama, people go, well, that would never happen.
Yes.
If you put it in a book, that would never happen.
Yeah.
What, like you've got all sorts of technological advancements. You've got AI doing incredible things. Elon Musk can launch a rocket and then reverse it back into its pod within, like, 2 minutes. You can do stuff like this. We can do transplantation surgery and not even... The surgeon doesn't have to be in the same country, let alone the same room, while they're doing it. But we can't stop a rubber boat sailing across the channel.
I know, it's laughable, really, isn't it? You're so right that if this was a kind of BBC comedy, it would be unwatchable because it would just be so farcical. It would be out of the realms of reality. But this is where we are because Britain doesn't have a deterrent system. We've got bad weather. That is it. That's literally what we're relying on, because what Andy Burnham is rather jumping the gun on is confusing policy change with bad weather. So he's rather saying that all these great big policy changes that really haven't happened or really have amounted to much are more effective than just choppy seas and rain over and very uncalm waters, which every fisherman in the channel has been saying has been the predominant for most of the year. That's why we've seen the reduction. It's nothing to do with Shabana Mahmood. It's nothing to do with the Labour Party. It is to do with the fact that the channel is uncrossable. When it is crossable, that is when you get thousands coming across. And you're so right. It is every single one of those people on that boat boat makes a mockery of border security and the fact that Britain is a serious nation that is capable of defending itself and the people that are here. That is what that is. It is a visual failure of the state and every successive government that has just been unable to stop a rubber dinghy. Like you say, we've got such technological advances, but nobody seems to own a Stanley knife. In France, I do not understand this. It makes a mockery of the nation. Sure. And more importantly, for as far as I'm concerned, Paris has stolen our money because we gave it to them to do a job. They didn't do the job, so we'll either have it back or, with interest, by the way, or start doing what we paid you to do. And if you don't start doing what we paid you to do, every single migrant is a fishing licence, and we'll start pulling it.
I get it. That's a great point. I know the French police are not the ICE department of the United States, but they are armed. They've got tasers, and, you know, nothing. Don't ever get on the side of a moody Frenchman or a moody French woman. Actually, that's a far worse situation. But that is why we quite, you know, have this sort of love-hate thing with France, because I quite like that.
I do, yeah.
That, you know, who are you? That sort of. You're thinking.
Listen very carefully. I shall say this only once.
But of course, you would. You'd think they would kind of be onto this with a bit of toughness, because they know how to pile in when there's a riot going on the old bill in France. But their response, when asked by Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Secretary, what do you do to stop them? The policeman says, we say to them, don't do that.
Yeah.
Three words.
It's the French...
Don't do that.
Yeah, it's the French equivalent of writing a strongly worded letter.
I'm not sure if I've got a great French accent or a terrible one.
I don't know, but Ofcom are on the door.
Don't do that.
It's quite good.
You can do it with a French accent. You can't do it with many accents these days.
I don't even have the accent of the town
You can
I'm
do
from,
anything you like with a French accent. It's absolutely fair game. You know, they do the same.
You're bordering on a lower low. Very close to a lower low.
Don't do this. Don't do this.
Yeah.
So, and I don't want to stereotype or anything like that, but when Jean-Pierre stops munching his baguette and actually starts doing some work, that's his answer.
Well, if you remember, way back when...
Don't do that.
The guy that was actually left in charge of this programme didn't turn up to work for half the year, and yet he was still paid a fortune. And then, I think that was about 2-3 years ago now, and yet we just continued to give the French money. At what point do we understand the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result? We just keep doing this. But you know, we have a trade deficit of over 8 billion with the French. Let's start to flex our muscles a little bit, shall we? But we're just terrified of doing it because we don't want to upset them. And I don't understand why, because they're perfectly clear and very happy to upset us. So I don't understand why we don't fight back. And then I realise we've got the equivalent of an emoji as a Prime Minister. So
that's very true.
That'll do it.
There is a vague defence of the French coming here, Peter.
Careful.
Don't do that. There is, here it is. Well, in fact, there's two, all right? So the official statement, we've fished out the official statement from the Home Office, OK? This is yesterday. The Home Office said, we are aware of posts circulating online that claim that French law enforcement are failing to prevent small boat crossings. UK-French cooperation has already stopped 46,000 attempted crossings since the election. Now, I don't know how they quantify that.
Yeah.
I don't know whether they see a load of fellas in a bush and go, well, they're not in a boat.
Yeah.
There's 50 of them, so...
If they've got a beach towel and sun cream, they're not trying to cross the channel.
Yes. Did they just add up the amount of people on Boulogne Beach?
It must be.
Well, we stayed here all day, none of them got on a boat, so that's a few thousand.
The problem I have with that statement is they're trying to take congratulations for doing their job.
Yes.
That's what I don't like. The Met Police are terrible for it as well. It's like, I'm not congratulating you for doing the thing you're paid to do. Yeah. What I'm going to do is berate you for continually failing to stop anybody on a dinghy. It's not difficult. I don't understand why this is so confusing. We know exactly where they're going from. We know exactly how they're doing it. All you need is a Stanley knife and some political will. And that seems to be about it.
Here's defence number 2 of the French. And it goes something like this. If you go to the northern border of France in places like Calais, it is constantly carnage pre anybody getting on a dinghy because of the amount of mostly young men that are just mooching around towns, sleeping in bushes, sleeping in woods, setting up in the town centre. It has become a ghetto of illegal migrants trying to get... Now, the French say, you think we want this?
True.
You think we want this? We would do anything we could to stop this. So that's their defence. Yeah, so when they say, don't do that, I'm even giving it some extra booster
I'm going to say,
rockets.
yes, yeah.
Don't do that! If they said it like that, I'd be a little more sold on it.
Yeah, we moved from Paris to Marseille now, but I would say the reality of that is that's why we gave them £500 million to build the structures, to build the infrastructure into Calais, so that is not a reality. I will say, to give another defence to the French, we keep rolling out the red carpet. We keep saying, come on in, we'll give you a hotel, free doctor, free healthcare, all this stuff. We'll give you dance classes and art lessons if you really want them.
Yep.
You know, we'll let you move around the country. That doesn't help, but when we've given you £500 million, I don't understand why Calais is in the state that it is in, other than the fact that you're not using the money effectively.
Yeah, I think you're right. Don't do that! We're just going to riff with that for 3 hours. I think we've got...
Yeah, I think that's the show.
At least 3 hours in there. Well, the question remains, in that case, as we said at the very beginning, in terms of immigration, what is Britain's next move on this? 0344 499 1000. The reality of this, by the way, politically, if Andy Burnham, not necessarily solved it overnight, but if he began the process of doing something against type, because he's a Labour Prime Minister, not a Tory one, which historically we tend to think one will solve it, the other one might not, even though evidence in the last half a decade or so has shown us that's not always true. If Andy Burnham did set the wheels in motion, he could be holding the keys to number 10 in 2029. And if he held an early election, he'd be home and dry. But he won't do that for some strange reason. We don't know why. 0344 499 1000. What is Britain's next move? Peter Barnes is with us. Loads more stories still to come. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yes, don't do that is the mantra from the French. What is Britain's next move? What is our next move? And that's to look at this story. This could be interesting. Kemi Badenoch is defending her view to scrap the net zero target. This is a letter in the Telegraph insisting it's the only way to bring down energy prices and grow the economy. She's arguing the point, really, that it's sort of political fiction that is bankrupting the country. This is not borne out in fact, and if it was fact and we were all literally about to die, then you wouldn't have China and India and the United States still burning stuff and digging and drilling and constructing mines and goodness knows what. No matter what they've done in the windmill side of things. I mean, China's got windmills all over the place. Yeah. The funny thing is, so as, you know, even in Trump's America, it's you go down to Texas.
Oh, yeah.
And that place is almost all windmills these days. It's a very So, OK, if somebody wants to do that, that's fine. But Badenoch's point is, let's not bankrupt ourselves. We understand climate change. We're not stupid. Look out the window. Stick your shorts on. I went out this morning at about 5:30 in a T-shirt and shorts. It was fine.
Yeah.
Could never normally do that, even in the summer.
Yeah, the neighbours were complaining.
Exactly. The neighbours always. The binoculars were out. Yes. Yeah. Folk were starting a crowdfunder, frankly. But I oblige. One bloke just looked out and went, "Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that."
OK, fair enough. To her point is, look, let's just take this easy. We don't need this crazy target.
Oh, without a doubt, it's completely the right thing to do. What is very interesting is that Kemi has been on a bit of a kind of cleaning out of the Conservative Party of the net zero nutters, for want of a better phrase. You know, she's deselected a lot of the candidates like Grant Shapps, Gavin Barwell has been booted out. A lot of the zealotry around net zero has been moved. One thing I did notice, though, and I've noticed this from a lot of anti-net zero parties, nobody talks about the Climate Change Act, the actual act of Parliament that confines the actions of the government. No one's talked about the repealing of that and how you're going to do it.
Interesting.
We also have the fact that the green economy is a large part of our economy at the moment. So how are you going to pull that apart without kind of making the markets lose their mind, and also infuriating businesses because they've invested on certain timelines? That's when that's what Rishi Sunak really got in the neck when he tried to do this. He didn't bother consulting the car industry and what impact that would have.
They've been geared up for one deadline and then he says there's another.
Exactly.
Deadline.
So that infuriates the business side of things. That also makes Britain look unstable, which makes international investment not as attractive, because if we can't keep our minds in one area, why would a company put billions into us? That's one of the big problems. What Kemi's also now got on her side is stable poll rating and a personal favourability rating. She's now strong enough as a leader to start doing this kind of thing, because also you've got reform on the decline. So now she could actually start to kind of push into a more ideological territory because she's got the political capital to be able to do it. And also, if you look at Aberdeen South, the last by-election, that was run by the Conservatives on an anti-net zero agenda.
True.
But quite convincingly.
But you're right, if this was to go bigger, then she's got an Act of Parliament to
She's
to
really
be
got to
challenged
start dealing with the technical side of it, which is the repealing of it.
Which is, it's kind of extraordinary. I mean, you know, a lot of it makes it. I mean, the green economy is interesting. I mean, obviously we look at cars and manufacturing. I don't know about windmills and stuff. I did discover, in fact, I heard this on good authority, that when they count the numbers in the green economy, and Ed Miliband says 5 trillion people in Kent alone work in the green economy. Apparently it includes bin men.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's one of those kind of catch-all phrases.
So there's quite a lot of jobs that have just been now called the green economy.
Anyone with a litter picker is now part of the green economy.
Part of the green economy, yes.
But then I always point out to people that always make that comment, well, ask people in Aberdeen South how many people lost their jobs because of the green economy. And it's not just people in that economy.
Good point.
It is people who lost their jobs in the cafes, in the restaurants, in the surrounding economies that rely on people going to work. It's the secondary and tertiary effects of this stuff that really is never counted by the net zero zealots.
Dave in London says, good Ian. Is that like a dog thing?
I'm going to say, is that like a dog thing?
Good Ian.
You'll take compliments wherever you can find them.
Thank you, Dave, for that. Good Ian. Good boy. He says, anyway, Kemi Badenoch is just following the coattails of reform. Net zero is a business opportunity. Is it that? I mean, Reform make this accusation, not unreasonably, that the Tories are just for... If the Reform hadn't raised this stuff, the Tories wouldn't be talking about it.
It's a perfectly fair criticism, but again, there are parties that sit on the right, you know... It's just one of those things, isn't it? That, you know, they're naturally going to follow where the country is going, and the country is becoming very sceptical of the net zero zealotry. So yeah, that's where they're going to go. Reform may think they lead the way on this stuff, but you know they've also got the same problem of just saying they're going to scrap net zero isn't a policy. It is, how are you going to do it? How are you going to make sure that the economy doesn't fall apart, business doesn't scare, all this kind of stuff. Just saying scrap net zero is a headline. It is not a policy.
Couple of stories to finish on here. I don't know if you've seen this one, the Green Party mayor. This is Green Party mayor and professional hatchet-faced trout Zoe Garbett, who's gave Haifa's mayor an October the 7th deadline to respond regarding to ending the twinning agreement. They don't want to be twinned with them anymore because they're Israel, and Israel are responsible for all of the world's ills, according to Green Party logic. I mean, normally the word Green Party and logic shouldn't sit in the same postcode, let alone the same sentence, but you take the point. And they decided they were going to untwin with this place, and they set them a deadline of October the 7th, which is randomly, I think, a Wednesday.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't, if you were going to set a deadline, it would be like end of the week or or whatever.
Also,
this
October
must have been
7th.
this must have been on purpose.
Yes, October 7th, really, like, people aren't going to remember the linkage between what happened on October 7th. I mean, let's be real. Hackney's has got much bigger problems to be dealing with that this woman should be sorting out. I went to Hackney for 15 minutes and locked the doors the entire time.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. This is yet again is political posturing, it's virtue signalling, and it is just beating down on what they say is, oh, well, it's anti-Israel. It's not. It's anti-Jew. Everybody knows it, and I'm sick to death of having to pretend that this is what people are really realistically objecting to. The mask has slipped too many times, and when all your masks slip in one direction, you know, it walks like a duck, it sounds like a duck, it's a duck. And I'm sorry, Hackney, the Mayor of Hackney should be focusing on Hackney, not bothering with this kind of nonsense. If they want to de-twin, fine. But, you know, fix your own backyard first.
Fix your own backyard first. And it's you know, it's always extraordinary that places like Hackney. I used to live in Bow, the neighbouring borough, and it was, I mean, that had some tricky moments, but I think Hackney goes to a whole other level.
Yes.
And it's interesting that, you know, Diane Abbott is, of course, is one of the MPs in that area. And they constantly vote in sort of left-wing people and constantly don't you say to continue as well as constantly have the same problems.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's deprivation, whether it's the bins being collected, whatever it happens to be. But you keep bringing Diane Abbott in, you keep having a Labour council in, you've now got a Green mayor over there in Hackney. I mean, what's going on? What is that thinking?
Oh, realistically, it's a victim mentality. They are the victims of something, so therefore, if somebody says it, it's not your fault that this is all terrible, it's all some big bad corporation, or it's all Israel, or it's this, then you get to kind of abdicate all responsibility for it, and that's what you see in these very heavy left-wing and progressive, I hate that word, progressive areas, is victim mentality. And that's the reality of it. You have to get rid of that, take accountability for your community, and then also people in those communities have to actually fix them themselves as well, get involved, do something.
Sure.
Don't expect somebody else to do it all the time.
Andy Burnham has got a message for employers. Don't do that when it comes to stopping them using AI to filter CVs and conducting interviews via Zoom, warning it disadvantages young people. There's quite a lot of this. They get a load of CVs, they whack them through the system.
Yeah.
AI says, good one, bad one, get rid of that, don't interview this person. He's suggesting that he's admitted experiencing imposter syndrome himself when he first arrived in Westminster at the start of his career. So he has an understanding of what it's like.
So he's still
Well, he should have it, because he's an imposter. So he understands the vulnerability.
Yeah.
And that is compounded, he's arguing, by companies using AI to filter CV, rather than a human being looking at it and conducting interviews on Zoom.
Actually, I'm going to do something very uncharacteristic. I think he might be right on this one.
Might be right.
I do. I think that the kind of rigidity of AI screening it is unfair. I do get it when a job gets thousands of applications, but the reality is people are all applying to the same jobs because there aren't that many jobs.
True.
And also most major firms, for example, if you look at the big four accountancy firms or the industry I tend to work in, more corporate side of stuff, most of them don't have entry-level schemes anymore because university degrees are worthless.
Yeah.
So the way that young people are being hired is very different now. It is, I do think, a little unfair, all this kind of on Zoom and all the rest. If you don't have the best camera or your tech's not up to standard, yeah, I can understand how you could be seen as a disadvantage. But then again, from the business side of things, it is quicker, it is more efficient in a way. But yeah, I on this one, I'm with Andy Burnham. I do think we have to do more to help young people get employed. And if we have to say to businesses, maybe, you know, actually interview face-to-face, you might get a different reaction. I bet most managers who have been around for a while will say, actually, yes, some people are better in person than they are over a screen.
I think I wouldn't say all the media, but certainly here, there is still a bit of the old-fashioned recruitment, which I quite like. So somebody comes in to do work experience. I've lost count of how many times I've seen this, and I still see this. Somebody comes in to do work experience, fast forward a couple of months, and you see them again, they're answering the phones or they're assisted. Finn, for example, who's the producer of this show, is not actually employed. He's still on perpetual work experience.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Position.
Yeah.
And it does, and we see the manifestation every single day in the programme. But you see my point?
Yes.
I mean, that sort of thing we're told, you know, that shouldn't happen anymore. I mean, people do work experience sometimes through schools, sometimes through somebody they know. I'm never going to apologise for that. If you know somebody who works in the industry and you say, oh, can my son come in or my daughter have a look around, that's brilliant. It's curious. I was just talking to one of the guys that's on air right now on TalkSport, used to be my assistant producer at another place, and one of the presenters on Times Radio was my phone operator at another place, and both came in on a kind of very sort of, I'll do a few weeks work experience, and there they are now. They're working at a different place and they're doing the jobs they wanted to do.
Yeah, I think that's always a good sign of a healthy company, actually. I really do. Rather than treating it as a work experience, I would just go get the coffee and just sit there and don't do anything. If you actually bring them in, give them something to do, you eventually see something in them, and that's a sign of good managers, good corporate kind of thing, and actually bringing new people into the fold is always a better way, but also promoting within as well. I think it shows that you can actually start at the bottom and work your way up. It's a good motivator for people here. I think it's the way that it should be.
So there's hope for corn-fed Finn.
Oh, I just presumed you just didn't let him out the building.
He does. He also lives here, which is kind of interesting.
He lives next door to me.
Yes, he does, yes. It's interesting. There's a little sort of basement there.
Yeah.
It's when they said it was a dark room, I wondered what they meant. But, who knows what goes on after 5:30? Peter, thank you.
Thank you.
We will see you very soon. Peter Barnes with us here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Immigration, what is our next move? We're going to be speaking to Brendan O'Neill in a couple of moments as well on this, and a couple of other stories too. Just gone 1:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Mag says, think 1,000 over 1,000 yesterday has to be a wake-up call to Andy Burnham. He has to call a Cobra meeting. He has to stop the boats. He has to start protecting our borders. It's his duty. Well, the problem with that, Mags, and others who are making the very obvious point, is that Andy Burnham has sort of suggested that the plan is working. The Labour's immigration policy is working. I'm trying to work out on what basis he's saying that. So there's a drop at the moment on the amount of people coming over the channel at this point in the year compared to this point last year. Okay, that does happen from time to time. We saw it a bit with Starmer, and then the second part of the year it went nuts and went up, and so it goes up and down. However, just put that to one side for a second. Since Andy Burnham has been Prime Minister, in fact just this week, we had 1,000 yesterday, I think it was 700 the day before, and Mr Burnham seems to be calling this some kind of success. Let's get a word with Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer and Journalist at Spite. Good afternoon to you, Brendan. Always good to get your views on this. I mean, it is rather extraordinary. We've seen it with Conservative Home Secretaries as well, so we're not letting them entirely off the hook on this, and Prime Ministers. Here's Andy Burnham almost continuing the same line. Well, it's sort of working at the moment, so the numbers are looking good. He acknowledges they can fluctuate, but suggesting that Labour's plan is kind of on the money.
Yeah, I mean, just complete nonsense. I was going to say a word beginning with B just there, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean. Complete nonsense, obviously untrue. You know, what is he talking about? It's kind of boggles the mind, doesn't it? Because all the evidence now suggests, and I don't say this lightly because I love this country, but all the evidence suggests that Britain is currently a failed state. Because the very first duty of the state is to protect its borders, to know where its borders are, to send armed men and women to protect them from invasion or from foreigners or from people and things that are crossing which shouldn't be. That is the first duty of an independent country. And if it fails in that duty, then it is a failed state. And I think that's the position we are now in the UK. We have hundreds upon hundreds of primarily young men coming from God knows where over our borders every single week. And we have this new prime minister. What's he doing? He's eating pork scratchings in the pub with John Healey, and he's telling everyone how much he loves the Smiths and Oasis. It's almost surreal. I can't think of any prime minister in history, you know, think about Thatcher or Churchill or any of people of that caliber who would have sat back and had a laugh while hundreds of men from foreign nations were pouring over our borders. It really is a surreal situation, and it suggests right now that at a fundamental level, this country is not working.
I mentioned this the other day, Brendan. I just happened to spot a clip on social media of Margaret Thatcher being interviewed about, I think it might have been about immigration. Whatever it was, wasn't the point. The fact is, there she was being interviewed by one of the sort of the senior Dimbleby back in the day, and even calling him Mr. Dimbleby in the interview, which was rather lovely in a curious way. But a very serious politician with very thought-out ideas. I get it. Not everybody would have agreed with her. She knew that, and that's fine. It's a democracy. But the way the argument was set out that she was advocating was intelligent, it was thoughtful, and meaningful, and it came from a philosophical place, if you like. There was no pork scratchings or time for silly japes and TikTok videos, not that it was around then, but this was serious politics, and we're lacking that.
We're completely lacking that now. And as you say, it's been going on for some time. We have had unserious politicians for quite some time now, politicians who are either just completely lacking in any kind of conviction or vision. They're just spin doctors in disguise, really, kind of putting out messages that they think will land, or they are these very performative politicians, which it seems is what Andy Burnham is, where he seems to be all about vibes, all about connecting with people, all about saying, I'm one of you, I'm just like you, let's have a pint, while the country is going down the toilet. I really hate saying that, but it is true. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that when you look at what's happening at the border, it shouldn't matter if you are a pro-immigration person or an anti-immigration person, whether you are a kind of liberal type who thinks we need more immigrants, or you're a kind of conservative type who thinks we need to really nip it in the bud. That shouldn't matter. We should be able to agree that it is wrong and dangerous and incredibly reckless for any country on earth to let hundreds of young men, fighting age men, to pour over its borders every single week. It shouldn't matter about your political persuasion. It shouldn't matter what party you vote for. That is wrong. That is actually a catastrophic situation, which suggests that Britain is not meaningfully an independent nation anymore. We are not in control of our own territory. We used to rule the seas. Now we can't even stop a few dinghies from crossing over the channel. It really speaks to, I think, a shocking disarray in this country.
Yeah, spot on. A couple of years ago, Brendan, I ended up, I was at an awards thing, and I sat down at this table, and I was next to the permanent secretary of the Home Office, and I thought, oh, this is rather interesting. And there was a little bit of, I went kind of full-on teenager for a second, because I just stopped myself. He said, oh, and he introduced himself. I won't say who he is, but there's not been that many, so people can work it out. Permanent secretary of the Home Office. And oh, right. And I nearly went, stop the boats. And I stopped myself from saying stop the boats, because I thought, he's heard that 10,000 times. But we did get into a conversation about it, and he did say, and he was quite robust about it, he said, do you think if we could stop them, we wouldn't? So there was that. He also blamed the French and said the French are the biggest problem in this equation.
Yeah, the French are a big problem. There is no question about that. We've all seen the videos this week from Chris Philp and others pointing out that the French are basically instructed not to stop the migrants from getting on their boats, not to stop them from setting sail for the United Kingdom. you know, to my mind, that's an act of hostility. In certain situations, it could even be considered an act of war if you are a foreign state facilitating the illegal arrival of men into another country. And it seems the French are essentially facilitating it because they're standing idly by, watching it happen. It's at the very least, it's kind of an extreme form of reckless neglect where they are just letting these men set sail for what they know their final destination will be, which is Britain. It's an act of hostility by the French, and I think it's unforgivable. And we are giving them hundreds of millions of pounds as part of this deal, and it seems to me they're reneging on their side of it. But, you know, having said that, I do think there's a growing tendency amongst people in the British establishment to blame just the French and to say, well, if they pulled their socks up and did their bit, we wouldn't be in this mess. But there are things we could do as well. We could have
100%.
much tougher border control. We could arrest people and detain them and deport them within a week if we wanted to. So the weakness is on our side as well as on the French side, and it's a real mess.
It's worth, on that point, having a little reminder of Chris Philp's venture over there. Paddling he was on the shores of Calais. I think the last word you hear on this clip is from a French police officer. It really is quite something. Let's have a listen.
Why have you allowed the migrants into the water? Why haven't you stopped them?
Our order is to let them go like that.
Your order is to let them go?
We just have to say to them, don't do that, it's dangerous.
Don't do that. There you go. That seems to be the deterrent over there at Calais HQ, Brendan. Don't do that. I mean, it's almost, it's satirical, really. But you're absolutely right, by the way. Many people making the point that, you know, that there is a pull factor in this country. Even Macron made that point. But don't do that is as bad as it gets if you're a French copper.
It's just surreal, isn't it? Don't do that is what you say to a toddler who's misbehaving. It's not what you say to a boat with 100 men on it. Not if you're a serious nation that takes your security seriously. I mean, there are so many other questions, aren't there? Like, how did these people get to France? How did they cross the entirety of Europe? How did they get either from the Middle East or from North Africa right up through Italy, maybe Germany, maybe Belgium, then to France, then to Britain? Some will go on to Dublin. Europe is in a mess right now. It has no sense of territorial integrity. It has no sovereign self-respect. You know, the whole idea of nationhood seems to have been put down the toilet. No one seems to believe in it anymore. And what these people are doing, these young men from foreign countries, are exploiting that weakness, exploiting the post-borders mentality by roaming around Europe and seemingly going wherever they please. And then, of course, a lot of them want to come to Britain because they know that they will be put in a 4-star hotel, they'll get a mobile phone, they might get some medical treatment, they might get some pocket money, they know that they will be given an easy ride, and they know that significant sections of the establishment will call the rest of us racist if we dare to complain about it. Absolutely. If we dare to say they shouldn't be staying in the hotel at our expense, they should be deported, they shouldn't have been led into the country in the first place. They're protected even from that kind of very legitimate criticism by a state that prefers to look at us as racist rather than fix the borders. The whole thing, it's a genuine crisis that deserves Cobra meetings, that kind of level of intensity, and it's just not getting it.
Indeed, and Donald Trump, not for the first time, has waded in again, speaking from the Oval Office, claiming he's warned Andy Burnham that migrants coming from all over the world is killing Britain. He said migrants arriving from Africa, South America, different parts of Asia, calling it an invasion of Europe.
You know, there will be people at The Guardian and other liberal outlets who will say, oh, my God, how dare he use the word invasion, just like they say if someone uses the word colonization or whatever else. They're more interested in policing language than they are in policing our borders. But that ship has sailed, no pun intended, because people are sick and tired of being called racist in that unjust way. It is not racist to want to live in a free nation that protects its borders from foreigners. It is not racist to want to live in a country that has controlled migration. It is not racist for elderly people to want to be looked after by people who have shared their island for the past few centuries, from people from those kinds of families. These things are not racist. These are very legitimate requirements that ordinary people people are making about the country that they call home. And the people who are destroying our home is a political class that has let our borders go to rack and ruin. That's the truth of it.
Absolutely right. Brendan, great to have you with us. Good to speak again. Brendan O'Neill, chief political writer over there at Spiked. Thank you to him. Fiona says Labour don't want to stop the boats. We are hearing Burnham. Just look at his cabinet. And that tells you everything you need to know. Why I, a Conservative, will not trust Kemi and the party. She never brings up illegal migrants at PMQs. Why, says Fiona. It's a very good point. Although she has talked about the Conservatives pulling out of the ECHR. Can they, I mean, there's a wider question here, and we could even do this as a whole debate. We might even throw it in tomorrow about whether the Conservatives can claw back the conversation from Reform. And Reform are having a bit of a wobble. I said this a couple of years ago. When Reform started to rise and consistently topping the polls, I said, not because of anything Reform had specifically done, but just the usual chronology of political events says, you know, yep, it's a big high, but there will be a low. There'll be a point when they get a bit of a kicking, bit of a ribbing, whatever form it takes, and their star will drop for a bit, but it will come back again. I'm convinced that will happen with Reform. But in the meantime, can Badenoch hoover up that territory? I know she was part of the last government, but she will be able to argue that, you know, they weren't all her decisions and not every decision was bad, but it needs more than just her. Can Badenoch save the Tories herself to the point where you would say, do you know what, I actually will vote for them again, even if you're holding your nose? Kelly is in Gloucestershire. Kelly, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Hiya. Well,
Hi.
I just wanted to say about the French. I really don't blame the French for doing absolutely nothing to try and get those illegal immigrants out of their country. Because, I mean, basically all that money that we're giving the French, maybe they're using it at the other end. Maybe they're trying to stop them coming in their country the other end.
Maybe.
And then once they're getting in, then they're just letting them back out again, because as we have with their women and their children and all of the hassles and troubles that those illegal immigrants bring with them. So, and we're the pull. We, England, the UK, is the problem. We are the pull, dragging those illegal immigrants into our country, and they're all coming through France because of us.
Well, that's true. I mean, most of them do stay in Europe, but we get still a lot in over from France. But do the French really want? This is one of their defences, Kelly, and I don't know whether it's a good defence, but the northern part, certain parts of the northern borders of Calais are carnage because you've got thousands of men camped out, hoping to catch a boat to the UK. So they would rather that wasn't the case. So wouldn't it be in their interest to try and stop them?
Yeah, but surely they are trying to stop them from coming into their country somewhere along the line. Surely they're doing that, you know. But then when they're getting down the bottom, when they're getting to where they can get rid of them, then why not?
Yeah, but you can just, you know, Europe being Europe, you can just walk around it, can't you? And, you know, you're not going to be subject necessarily to passport controls if you're just hopping over a landlocked border.
Yeah, but I don't know, what is France doing to stop them coming into their country in the first place and passing through their country to come to our country?
Not a lot. I mean, France have look, I don't want to have any sympathy with France, but they have a massive problem with immigration as well. It's huge.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
but Macron said, I mean, he stood there and he said, why is Britain making it so appealing for them to come?
And it is appealing. It really is appealing. Whatever way you slice it, it is appealing. If you think you're going to be accommodated and you're going to have warmth and security and safety and medical care and 3 meals a day, forget about the fact that, you know, you maybe a charity might give you a mobile phone. Generally speaking, you're going to get 39 quid. It's not loads to live on, but I tell you what, if you've just left Eritrea High Street as your last address, then believe me, living in the Four Seasons in Basingstoke is not a bad result.
No. Well, I'm telling you now, if I was one of them French policemen, I'd be carrying them people from the sand dunes and plopping them on a boat, and I'd push them into sea. I'd give them a little push and say, bon voyage. That's what I'd be doing, because I wouldn't want them...
You wouldn't be saying, don't do that.
Don't do that.
Indeed. Kelly, I love it. Thank you. Kelly in Gloucestershire, starting us off, 0344 499 1000. 10 to 2, this is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
From Claire, who's near the Cotswolds, says, Ian, if Burnham won't take his head out of his own backside and call a Cobra meeting over illegal boat taxi service, can't Kemi call for one? This is now a national emergency and we are hemorrhaging billions of pounds. So we so desperately need here in the UK. If Burnham stopped the boats, he could fund his social care project straight away. You see, this is the illogical and bizarre and bonkers nature of government. If you look at, there were a couple of things yesterday that when we were talking about social care that came up, and one of them obviously was immigration, that if you look at the billions of pounds that is spent on that on an annual basis, it's not going to cover everything, but it will be some of it. And in fact, I think the figure we're often given, which is 3 or 4 billion a year, it's likely to be much more than that. But also you solve other issues around accommodation and housing and health and care, and because you alleviate the additional pressure that's on it as well. And the only thing I can think about Kemi is that at the moment she's keeping her powder dry on this because it's still quite raw that the Tories also did nothing. And right now, Burnham could go, actually, there are fewer boats crossing the Channel than when you were last in government. He could make that argument. So maybe that's the reason. Dan is in Portsmouth. How you doing, Dan?
Good. Another lovely day. Enjoying listening to the show, and you're covering my favourite topics.
Thank you, Dan. That's great. Well, net zero's interesting. We just mentioned Kemi Badenoch, and I was asking I know you wanted to talk about net zero. Can the Tories claim this territory now?
The point I want to make is this, right? Whatever our problems are, whichever one you want to choose, right? They all are inextricably linked to one thing, and that is we're skint, but no money.
Yeah.
Right? And all of the problems that are big go back to that, and they're all exasperated by the fact we're potless. Now, Ed Miliband jumps around and says, "Oh, it won't make any difference to your bills if we drill North Sea oil. It won't make any difference because it's set on the world track." Right. So let me just some figures that the Office of Budgetary Responsibility have set out. Okay, 2022-23, we got from North Sea oil gas. I'm not sure if it's only just that, but that won't even touch the surrounding industries. Right, just short of 10 billion tax revenues.
Okay.
10 billion, all right?
So that's a lot of money the last time I looked.
526, we're now down to 2.7 billion.
Right.
Cost for 30-31 is going to be 0.3, it's 300 million.
Unless we start drilling again.
Yeah, well, so that's the first point. That is a lot of money. That is a lot of money that we can then throw at our other existing problems. Choose a problem. We can throw that money at it. So Miliband's a maniac, all right? Now, regardless of all of that, I used to work I'm an oil worker. Mm-hmm. All right? I was in the North Sea for nearly 20 years. I've now left the country, left the North Sea, and I work in Saudi. So the government's not getting any money off me anymore, and I'm working in Saudi because Saudi haven't heard of net zero. So I'm not the only one that's done that. You're getting a huge brain drain. Lots of people across the board just leaving the industry. It's not a big industry, so people aren't getting trained up. All right, there's no people coming through. Big projects take years to procure, to design, to manufacture, to prepare, to install. Yep. So they seem to think they're just going to go, actually, scrub around that, we'll open the North Sea again. It doesn't work like that.
No, of course.
It's just going to all come back. And then you add to the fact that there'd be no confidence for investors.
Yep.
Investors won't they won't invest in it. So, these people are... If an idiot like me can understand this, and I've been talking to you about this problem for years, and I've been saying that we need to come down slowly, we carry on using our resources, we slowly transfer to new technologies. If I can understand it, and these people can't, we're in a world of...
Well, that's the bit that it's so bizarre, because I agree completely with what you just said on this, Dan, and similarly, if I can understand it, surely the entire might of every, some of these civil servants, I'm not just talking about civil servant who's a pen pusher that went to Oxford and just got a job. I'm talking about some of the civil servants that are top lawyers, environmental lawyers or economic lawyers, people who really, top of their tree that we employ. And then there's the politicians on top of that. If you and I can work this out, is there something we don't know, or is there something they don't know?
I honestly, I've been down every rabbit hole. I'm not scared of a conspiracy theory. I just don't know. I don't know where. I mean, they're in lockstep in the UK on this. It was that idiot Johnson. He was banging to it. So you can't even blame parties.
Yeah.
You can't even blame parties. They're all on it.
Johnson wanted... Yeah, he was obsessed with it, Boris Johnson. I don't know how his star rose on the right quite so much. I know Brexit played a part, but he was absolutely wedded to this stuff. Listen, Dan, I've got to run, but thank you very much indeed for that. Great call from Dan. I get the exasperation as well. And Gav says, my secondary school has 350 students. Every time I hear the number of boat migrants coming over, it reminds me there's a new school population coming every day. It reminds me of interviewing a lefty on this once who said it's not that many people over the course of a year. It's only like half a Wembley Stadium. You ever been to Wembley Stadium? It's flipping massive. It's like a city. Lines are open, 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Yeah, welcome back. It is the home of Common Sense. Loads to get through in this section. We're talking about many things here, but particularly the French police, don't do that, who stood by and watched around about 1,000 migrants set sail for Britain yesterday. This was just hours, by the way, after the Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, insisted his small boat plan was actually working. It's working a treat. It's 1,000 people yesterday, 700 I think it was the day before that. They keep on coming. Mr Burnham is now setting his own PB on this. More migrants crossing in his first week in office than Keir Starmer's. I mean, I appreciate the bar is a bit iffy on this one, but Burnham so far is carrying the gold. Details on that. What is Britain's next move on this bizarre, never-ending, Gordian knot, conundrum, cul-de-sac of a story? Also this afternoon, Kemi Badenoch defending her pledge to scrap net zero. She's insisting the 2050 target is a political fiction bankrupting the country. She's absolutely spot on. She's recognising climate change, but the idea that somehow we're artificially going to change it by a few political shenanigans is not going to work. In fact, we are bankrupting ourselves, is her point. Can she really steal a march on this and own this conversation? And a major new report warns that Britain's white population has fallen from almost 90% in 2000 to around 70% today. The author, David Goodhart, arguing that wanting to preserve a majority white Britain does not make you a bigot. Well, we kind of knew that. We'll be speaking to Mr. Goodhart a little later in the programme. 0344 499 1000. And Terry in Slough says 2 words sum up politicians, both Labour and the Tories, that lets these small boats invade our country: gutless and spineless. Great show, Ian, says Terry. Terry, thank you for that. Yeah, you do what, in the absence of anything else. Nobody has been... Again, it's just broken record territory. We come back to the same curious, almost cliches now. Is it really beyond the wit of mankind to stop a rubber boat floating across the channel with 1,000 people on it to arrive and have some kind of refuge in this country? In some cases, permanently so. Is it... All the things we can do. Think of AI, think of technology, think of the advancements we've made. Here we are in this incredible tech-based world of the 21st century. A quarter of a way through this century, and we can't stop a boat. You put it like that, it seems quite literally unbelievable. What is Britain's next move? Our lines are open. So let's go back to Kemi Badenoch then, talking about climate change. She's acknowledging it is real, but has a big question mark over the net zero 2050 target, calling it pure fiction. Even commentators are now asking whether the whole fight for net zero has already been lost and whether it's time to scrap it altogether. Let's speak with Allister Heath, editor of the Sunday Telegraph. Allister, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us. Look, Kemi Badenoch will always be, I suppose, associated with previous administrations who were very evangelical about this, Theresa May, even Boris Johnson. So she's got her work cut out in convincing people that she's somehow developed an entire new philosophy around this. But broadly speaking, is she onto something here?
Yes, I mean, I think she's 100% spot on. I think she has successfully entirely U-turned from the original Conservative position, which was catastrophic and which basically adopted the entire central planning system that is net zero, with its, all these targets and its climate change committee and all its bans and regulations and restrictions and binding carbon targets and all the rest. And she's come out against this. She says quite correctly, global warming is real. And she also says equally correctly, net zero is not the answer. Net zero by 2050 in particular is not the answer. So I think she's spot on. I don't think she owns this political terrain because Reform are saying the same thing, basically. But I think there's been a dramatic shift on the right of British politics, which is that the two principal parties now reject what was the orthodoxy, the consensus, a very stultifying, taboo subject even until very, very recently. So there's been a really big shift in British politics.
It does sound, I mean, certainly on the information we have at what Kemi Badenoch has said, I mean, it sounds all pretty logical stuff. I've always argued that a sixth form politics student could probably work this out, that yes, we acknowledge climate change. We all know that. Look out the window, put your shorts on at 5 in the morning during the months of July and August. We can see the climate has changed. That's not in dispute. But the evangelical nature of net zero is absolutely up there. Now, there is a Climate Act, of course, in Parliament. That becomes a fairly impenetrable, for some, a cul-de-sac to try and penetrate. How far can she take this?
Right. She would have to repeal the Climate Change Act or massively modify it. I mean, really, really modify it. And there'd be a huge amount of legislation to change. It'd be a very, very big, major revolutionary act. I hope she will do it. I think it's very important to realise that you may think all of this stuff is common sense, but until 2 or 3 years ago, as you and I both know, it was entirely taboo to go against net zero. It was a catastrophic faux pas if you dared to do that, if you dared to criticise it. And even now, when you do, as I did, for example, in my column today in the Telegraph, well, you get inundated with, hateful comments from left-wing activists and net zero activists, which I don't care about. But the point is, that's still the reality. And they still pretend that you're conflating climate change with net zero, and they still pretend that you're trying to deny the reality of climate change. I certainly do not deny the reality of climate change. I think climate change is real. My point is, Britain accounts for 0.8% of global emissions. Right, we've cut ours by 44% since 2000 or so. The Chinese, on the other hand, have increased theirs by 265%, and they account for almost a third of emissions. And our entire reduction in emissions and the entirety of the European Union's reduction in emissions has been massively more than cancelled out by the rise in Chinese emissions. In other words, all our massive, massive efforts have achieved absolutely nothing.
Indeed.
And not continue.
And by definition, of course, this is a global thing, so you couldn't have a climate initiative in isolation. So, as you rightly say, the Chinese, India, United States, they have a very different agenda on this stuff. And I mean, the Chinese model, I sort of, in a curious way, I sort of admire it, really, because they seem to be arguing, look, we're up for, I don't know anybody who doesn't want clean air and a nice environment. Of course, we all want some of that. But their argument seems to be, look, we'll have a parallel thing going on here. We'll do the windmills, we'll do the solar panels, but simultaneously, we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot. We've got lots of natural resources. We will continue to use them. It seems pretty much that simple.
Yes, that's been their strategy. Plus, they're weaponising net zero to their advantage. For example, entering the electric car. They're destroying the German car manufacturing sector. Without cars, Germany is in crisis. And yet their car industry is now collapsing because of Chinese exports to Europe, and also because the Chinese are no longer buying German cars because they've developed very sophisticated electric cars that are almost as good as Teslas, basically. So I mean, so the Chinese have been very clever as usual. They're weaponizing our stupidity as usual. But I think, it's time to reflect on this because, we were calmed, we were lulled into a false sense of complacency by the fact that everybody signed up to these major international treaties all those years ago, and there was this almost unanimous desire to supposedly reduce carbon emissions and so on. But in reality, Britain's done more than anybody else, probably proportionately, or almost more than anybody else. A few other European countries have equally savagely cut their emissions, but the emerging economies never really wanted to do that, right? They just signed up to all this stuff, but never really wanted to do it. And in my piece, I even postulate that, supporters of climate change really, they'd love to have a global government that imposes all these measures.
Yes. Yeah.
But even in that, what I believe to be a very horrible scenario of a global autocratic government imposing these sorts of things on people, even under that scenario, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have had net zero at all, because such a global government would have been controlled by all these emerging powers, from Brazil to the African countries to obviously China and India and Russia and everybody else. The only people who really want to cut emissions more than anything else, and who want to prioritize cutting emissions above economic growth, are basically people in Europe primarily. And even in America is very divided. When you got a Democratic president, he or she wants to cut emissions. When you got a Republican, they don't care. So that, the answer is not these arbitrary, centrally determined targets to cut emissions. The answer is economic growth to adapt to a changing climate that we cannot actually control. And secondly, lots of capitalism and entrepreneurship to invent new clean technologies that in due course and in the right time, when they become competitive and good enough, can naturally supplant the old technologies in a free market. For example, in my view, electric cars are almost at that level. The best electric cars are better than petrol cars, I think. They're still too expensive, but they're getting better. And obviously, you've got all the infrastructural problem, and we don't produce enough electricity and all that sort of stuff. But it's that kind of thing. I think we should trust a free market to impose clean technologies, not try and dictate it via central planning in a way that basically cripples consumers and destroys our economy.
Absolutely spot on. And it does seem, and you're right, that the sort of the kind of left-wing thinking. I mean, it's almost the ultimate left-wing theme. Left-wing thinking always needs an enemy, of course, and what greater enemy than the destruction of the planet? And you're on the side of good, and you want to save it and make the air clean so that our children can survive. And we've seen some of these sort of mad characters gluing their buttocks to the tarmac in order to show their allegiance to saving Mother Earth. And people lose their mind. They discombobulate over this, led by people like Ed Miliband, that it makes you a nicer person if you care for this. But you're right what you said. It's a conflation of things here, because it's not denying climate change to say that arbitrary targets are unhelpful and in fact an act of self-sabotage.
Yeah, I mean, we've waged war against climate change for 10 years, and us, Britain, and a few other countries in Europe have basically achieved nothing. We haven't really affected emissions, and we haven't really affected the temperature trends. It's been a complete unmitigated failure. There's been massive costs with more or less zero gains because of the behaviour of other much, much more important economies such as China. So I think that's a really big issue. But secondly, I'll just point out one thing. I think there's actually less concern about climate change now, despite all the fires in France and Spain and in England, than there was a few years ago, because a lot of left-wing activists have moved on to the latest thing, because they don't really believe in one particular cause. They believe in the omni-cause, which is a generalized dislike of the West and of our civilization. And these days, they're obsessed with hating Israel, with demonizing Israel. And they've kind of moved away from climate change. And you see that with Greta Thunberg. She doesn't really care anymore about climate change. She's only obsessed with bashing Israel. So I think it's quite interesting how these things move on. But we are basically stuck with the entire legal apparatus of net zero, all these automatic mechanisms that keep coming in, these rolling carbon budgets which lead to massive reductions in various sectors. And we are paying a massive, massive price, which is the destruction of our industry. And even our electricity is becoming more and more expensive, or at least much more expensive than it used to be. And actually our output of electricity has fallen, which is a remarkable failure. And we're increasingly reliant on imports. And, the whole grid is teetering on the brink. There have been multiple stories about that in recent weeks. And for what? We haven't actually saved the planet. We haven't done what we hoped to do. So I'm just saying, let's be much more realistic. Let's learn to adapt to this change environment that we can't actually control here in Britain. Let's adapt. Let's, we need air conditioning everywhere. We need different forms of housing. Yep. We need a new targeted strategy to prevent forest fires. We need to buy these firefighting planes. We need dozens of them. We need all that kind of thing. Yeah. We need massive investment in reservoirs. Maybe we need pipelines of water from Scotland to England. We need desalination plants. But above all, we need cheap and reliable energy to produce all of that stuff. And there's many very hot countries with climates that used to be deemed to almost inhabitable, that have boomed in recent years, everywhere from Florida to Dubai, to Asian countries and so on. You can cope with hot weather. You can cope with bad climate. But you just need to be rich enough to do that, and you need to harness entrepreneurship, and you need to harness free market economics.
Indeed. I was in Abu Dhabi a couple of years ago, and I thought it was the people I was staying with. The guy used to go to work. He worked in defence, and he would go to work in a three-piece suit and a tie. And I used to think, well, that's interesting. And of course, he made the very obvious point that, well, the country is adapted to deal with that. He said, I'm never not in an air-conditioned environment. I leave the house, which has aircon. I get in a car, which has aircon. I go to my office that has aircon. I then go to the rugby club after work or whatever it is, and that has aircon as well. They just simply adapted to it, and that's one of the hottest places on planet Earth, for goodness sake.
Exactly. So there's no reason why we can't do that too. And also, but the key thing we need is cheap and reliable electricity, and we're getting expensive and rare electricity.
Just a final point, Allister, while you're with us, just a brief point, if you would, on immigration. We know these figures this week have been very high since Andy Burnham became Prime Minister. Not good news for him. Yesterday, 1,000 migrants. The day before, I think it was 700 on boats. The new figures have just come in from the Home Office in the last half an hour. 752 migrants arrived yesterday. I mean, these numbers are big. Andy Burnham says it looks like we're on the case. We're beginning to solve the problem. What do you say?
I don't think we really are when it comes to small boats. I think this is going to increasingly become, once again, a more salient issue. Immigration is slightly cyclical. You know, in winter, there are fewer small boats, so people care slightly less about immigration. But in reality, when you look at polling, immigration remains a high salience issue. And Burnham's genius in the last few weeks has been to pretend that immigration wasn't an interesting and important subject and just talk about other things like social care and so on. But that won't last, right? He's got this he's in this honeymoon period. A lot of journalists think he's brilliant because he smiles and he can produce social media videos, all that sort of stuff. You know, it won't last, right? Immigration is a major, major issue facing this crisis, this country. A very large percentage of the population cares deeply about immigration, and Labour needs to do something about this. They need to address this. They can't go on sticking their heads in the sand and talk about other things. At some point, reality will catch up with them, and they're going to need to tackle this. The problem is you can't tackle it under current legislation. You can't tackle it if you sign up to the ECHR with the Human Rights Act, all that sort of stuff. You need a radical change in approach. And I see absolutely no chance whatsoever that Labour will indeed do that. And so this is obviously to the advantage of Reform in the Conservative Party if they're able to actually jump onto the case.
Indeed. Allister, great to have you on with us. Thank you. We will speak again, I hope. Allister Heath, editor of the Sunday Telegraph, with us here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Thoughts on all of that? I think the last point he made about immigration is spot on. You're going to keep going round in circles until you have a new set of laws and regulations that you can work with. And it's just not in Andy Burnham's DNA. It's not in the Labour Party's DNA. In fact, they're the very sort of opposite to this. And the minute you raise your head, the Labour Party, particularly the Greens, and of course Burnham sort of needs those fence-sitting Greens because he's thinking if they can hop over in my direction, that makes my mandate, my position as Prime Minister more promising come the next election. He ain't going to say a word on this. Not really. Not really. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 22 minutes after 2 o'clock. Stuart in Ashton says, Andy Burnham is my local MP. Ashton in Makerfield has been largely untouched by immigration, but we're now seeing drastic changes in the demographics of the local area. Ironically, Burnham's old constituency of Lee is now largely an immigrant population, and that has only happened in the last decade. Local properties are now unaffordable as they've been bought up as HMOs, and we've seen an uptick in crime, including multiple attempted kidnappings of children. Now, if you look at that, we're talking about a story in the next section about the new report, or in the next hour, I think it is, Finn, isn't it? In the new report that looks at Britain's white population has fallen from 90% in 2000, it's only 26 years ago, to around 70% today. Now, populations change, and in the last 30 years, the world has got smaller, the internet has taken over, air travel is normal and default. So there's lots of factors behind it, not just immigration. But the idea that you'd want to keep hold of your culture, since when is that being controversial? Doesn't mean you have to be white, although for many people, having a white culture celebrated is no more controversial than a black culture being celebrated, which I think reasonably to say we hear about far more often. Whether that's through the lyrics of songs, whether it's through campaigners. A black comedian can turn up on the Graham Norton show and talk about how his black brothers, and I'm not being smart by saying that, we're a culture, we're a people. We need recognising, we need acknowledging. If you transpose that to white or maybe even brown, you might get in trouble for that. We'll talk about that a little later. 0344 499 1000. Let's go to Charlie in East Sussex. How you doing, Charlie?
Well, I'm very well, Ian.
Good.
As usual.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, do you know what? Listening to the news this morning, they had a report on there saying, right, this rubber boat was coming over and it wasn't quite in, it was still in international waters. You know, we've got that little strip that goes down the middle of the channel. And they said there's 2 Border Force cutters waiting to take them back to the UK. And I was just thinking to myself, hold on a minute. Why are they waiting to take them back to the UK? Why aren't they going out to them, turning them around and taking them back to France? It's the same result, isn't it? Taking them back to shore, making sure they arrive safely. So why are they waiting to bring them here? This is what I don't really understand, Ian, and I'm perplexed by it, to be honest. So if you're saying, OK, we need to escort them over for their safety, and I know tragically 3 women were killed earlier today. In what circumstances, I wouldn't like to say, but you can say yes, it's for safety. Mm-hmm. But likewise, flip it over. Why wait for them? Why not go intercept them and take them back to France?
Maritime law, apparently.
I just don't get it. I don't get it. Maritime. Well, no, because maritime law, if they're not in our territorial waters, you take them back to the nearest safe port, don't you? So that would be France. If they've just come from France, just take them back to France. I mean,
But how would you take a? Doesn't the? I'm not defending it, by the way, obviously. But doesn't the law say that once you are in motion, that you can't mess around with the boat?
Well, hold on a minute. I mean, what if you're turning around in circles? Yeah, that's motion, isn't it? What about if they're coming towards you and our Border Force cutters are waiting for them? They're in motion, aren't they? You know, what do? Just stop? Do they just go up to one of our vessels and stop? No, they're in motion. So let's have a look at it. We need some bit of joined up thinking here. And to be honest with you, and I think lots of people have said about the pull factor of the UK. So you can see, I mean, the French are obviously mightily frustrated with ourselves, mm-hmm. and we just need to stop this pull factor. If we can do that, if we make it not saying be unpleasant to people, but if we make it not such a great place for illegal migrants to come, then we would that would go part of the way to solving the issue. But I don't know, it just perplexes me really, and I'm out on the road all day every day, doing my thing, trying to earn a living, paying a shed load of tax, and I'm thinking to myself, do you know what? Why am I doing it? My son's emigrated to Canada for a much, much better life because you just can't get on over here these days. And for youngsters, buying a property, raising a family, Yeah, and then of course we've got this. There's only 70% of us left in the UK. Oh my giddy aunt! I'm going to have to turn the radio. Well, I'm going to listen to Heart 70s.
Yeah, do that. Yeah, that's what you need to do. You need a little bit of Yvonne Elliman to get you through the afternoon. Love it. Thank you very much indeed, Charlie, for that. Great call. John's in Hampshire says, my solution to the migrant crisis, instead of giving the French 50 million, buy a couple of hovercrafts and put them in the channel. When these migrants attempt to cross the channel, process them on the hovercraft. All those who have no right to be in the country can be taken straight back to France in the hovercraft. The biggest way to stop this is to demotivate those attempting to cross. Can you imagine the reaction when people who left Calais at breakfast were back on the beach by lunch? And that's the problem, because we're told, because there was the argument that you just have a processing boat at Dover, so you'd never ever make it to the mainland. You'd be processed on a boat. But the processing... The processing time is years. It's not even hours. So to process those, I don't know why it's that long, but that's how the argument seems to go. And maybe John is onto something here. Maybe there's a swifter way. But even if you were to decree that we've got X amount of people that shouldn't be here, then you can't just take them back to France, because the problem isn't exclusively French. We share the problem. I think that's the general global parameters within which this subject operates. I think I've got that about right, but somebody please call me up and tell me I haven't, because I'm all up for John's plan in Hampshire. 0344 499 1000. Patrick in Kent says, sorry, it's the Tories who gave us mass immigration and net zero. Yes, I've made that point many times throughout the show. In fact, Theresa May was very, very up for the whole net zero thing. Nothing wrong with a policy that aspires to have a cleaner environment. We all get that. We're all up for that. You know, if you can make a building that leaks less than some of the old Victorian buildings, then fantastic. If you can recycle your grub and there's a way to make that into some kind of meaningful fertiliser or manure or whatever the hell they do with it, then great. I'm up for that as well. That all makes perfect sense. If it's about cutting off our nose to spite our face and utilising energy from other countries, even though we've got loads of it under our own feet, I'm not up for that. And I don't think anybody else with a brain should be either. 0344 499 1000. 2:30, this is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just gone 2:30. This is interesting, how Iran attacks Britain now, not through soldiers, but through teenagers. A kid 18-year-old called Johannes Natland was found in a Yorkshire hotel room with 2 loaded guns, recruited by a Swedish gang working directly for the Iranian regime. He's now been convicted of conspiracy to murder. Police say they stopped an assassination on British soil. How many more are being recruited in this manner? A kid from Norway. Let's speak with Chris Phillips, former head of National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Afternoon to you, Chris. I mean, just firstly, did this story surprise you?
No, it didn't, Ian. The simple fact is that we know that Iran, and this appears maybe to be not state-backed, but organised crime-backed, and other countries, such as, in particular, Russia, have been operating in the UK and across the rest of the West, actually, but through proxies. And proxies that they recruit on the internet, the dark web, to do their bidding for them for cash.
Do we know who this teenager was meant to murder?
No, I don't think that's clear at the moment, Ian. The interesting fact is he probably had no idea either, and was going to be given the details over the internet at a certain point. This is a very, very difficult thing to police, to be quite honest. And the officers that have managed to stop this from happening have done a great job. And of course, many assassinations may take place which don't involve guns, which involve being knocked over by cars and things, which may have happened in the past that we're not even aware of.
Yeah, that's very true. Something that's gone down as an accident. Somebody may or may not have done, a couple of years in jail for it, falling out of windows. But the person that was around or never seen again, had 50,000 quid shoved in their bank account somewhere. So this kind of, I mean, one would assume that if this is, it's this Iranian-linked foxtrot criminal network, whether they work tacitly on behalf of the government or other reasons, whether it's revenge for some kind of debt over something, who knows? But you'd have to think somewhere along the line, Chris, that the target would have been, if it's political, somebody substantial.
Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly in terms of their title, even if we haven't heard of them.
Yeah, we don't know at this stage. And of course, we've had assassinations recently. Members of Parliament, ex-members of Parliament have been attacked. And these things are likely to happen in the future, which is why people do need to take security seriously, particularly if you're in the public eye.
Indeed. This was a teenager that apparently was, not to show too much sympathy with somebody who's just been done for conspiracy to murder, but had grown up in children's homes, I think, and had met somebody through somebody and then through somebody else. And, I guess these organisations would try and spot somebody of that kind of makeup, someone whose background was...
There's an awful lot of people, those sort of people around. And it's not only youngsters, actually. I mean, I think a year or so back, we had an ex-Royal Marine who was, I think he killed himself in the end, but he was convicted of setting fire to a building supposedly paid for by the Russian state. So these things have been happening for a little while now, and I'm sure as time goes on, they will continue. And it's really a difficult thing for the security services to monitor and to prevent.
Indeed, and it's possible they don't even know who the intended target might have been.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably the case. It depends what this young man decides to say now that he's been convicted.
Chris, great to have you on as ever. Thank you very much indeed for that. That is Chris Phillips, former head of National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Thank you to him. 25 to 3. One from Kate in Links, who says, I don't know why you and your guests seem to find the invasion of the UK funny to laugh about. You're witnessing the end of our country. Bet you don't read this text out. I honestly thought people stopped saying, bet you don't read this out, in about 1990. Kate's still on it. It isn't funny, of course. What is almost Keystone Cops territory, and if it wasn't so serious, it would just be funny, is the sheer ineptitude, which is laughable. The idea that you can hop on a boat, the idea that you have a French police officer saying, don't do that, as some form of deterrent, the idea that you're welcomed on the shores by the authorities, the idea that you end up in a hotel with a pool table and some chicken nuggets by about 6 o'clock. That there is a dark humour to the ridiculousness of this story. And I think sometimes if we don't give our head a comedic wobble, then we will just go mad. We will just go mad. This story to me is literally beyond belief. I often say, I'm sure I'm not the only person, you know, once in a while you kind of revisit some of your politics and think, I used to think this, I used to think that, you know, somebody said to us in the week, could you ever vote for Andy Burnham? And the answer would be an emphatic no, because you know what he's about. If he solved this, would I consider on this one policy alone of voting for Andy Burnham? And it's probably the one area, I think, and I'm not just talking about channel migration, I'm talking about other forms of immigration. I'm talking about the change of cultural identity of a country. To me, cultural assimilation, or a lack of it, is absolutely key to the immigration debate. It doesn't get talked about often enough. I think it is right up there alongside the economic debate, which doesn't get talked about often enough either. I think those two elements of this discussion, economics, assimilation, are absolutely massive. They are game-changingly massive to this country. And I'd like to think at different levels, the left and the right would agree on this. Because the left might agree from a more humanitarian perspective, channel migration, and the right would agree on the very points I've just made. What I'd like to think everybody could agree on is the unsustainable nature of the economics that surround this. You know, when people come into this country, putting aside heart surgeons and neurosurgeons and people do amazing work in care homes, we all get that bit. Nobody is saying we should have no immigration. But kind of outside skilled jobs and very specific roles where you require a certain person and the person who is best for the job happens to come from Australia or Nigeria, I don't really care if they're great at the job. Bring them in, employ them. They will also be net contributors. But if you walk around certain parts of this country and look at certain communities, you'd be hard-pushed to form the argument that what you're seeing in some of these almost enclaves are people that are net contributors. I think in many cases you will see some of the poorest boroughs that have some of the highest immigration, and there's really no net contribution in those areas in any meaningful way. That doesn't mean to say that everyone's on the scrounge. It also doesn't mean that everyone's here to nick our money. I'm trying to be understanding of things here. So even if you are understanding, you would still be left with the irredeemable reality that it is costing the country money in the multiple millions, but it's also costing the country a cultural issue as well. And why would that not be a significant factor? So in answer to the point from Kate, I don't find it funny at all. I think it's one of the most disturbing and serious issues of our time. What I try to do, and I always try to do this, is not go down the path of everyone's a criminal, everyone's a rapist and all that business. I think you lose the argument, all right? I think the strongest arguments are economic and cultural. I believe they are. And I think you can win the argument better. I know sometimes you have to be seductive to win an argument, but at the moment the argument's being lost and there's no politician really. I think Rupert Lowe probably on this point, and I know his points are not always popular, and sometimes he or some of those that represent him are very, very clunky and often not even helpful in this debate in the way they impart things. But the overarching recognition of the size of the problem, I think Mr. Lowe identifies very accurately, and I don't really see many doing that. Bob is in Ludlow. Bob, what have you got for us? Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Matt. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. What are you thinking?
Good. I've got a point that I rang up about, but just on top of that, you just brought up economics and the economics of the whole thing. And the problem from that point of view with us, I think, to quote or to pinch a quote from a well-known comedian, is that Labour's economics policy is like a crack ad with a payday loan.
Yes. Yeah.
But the other thing...
But the left do like to spend money and other people's money, right?
Yeah. The other thing was that I actually phoned up about was I think we could be being a bit myopic in how we approach the returns thing. France is part of the EU. Now, with it being part of the EU, they have an open borders policy.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we just return these people to the EU, not to France specifically, but to anywhere in the EU, and say, get on with it?
Why do you think that doesn't happen?
Well, we don't even return them to France, mate, let alone anywhere else.
I mean, but I suppose the question is, how do you physically return somebody? Where do you put them? You couldn't just land a plane in somebody else's country. I mean, they had the Rwanda plan, which was very costly, but it was sort of slightly resembled. It was a sort of pound shop Aussie plan, but
they've got plenty of coastline.
Well, that's very true. That's very true. I mean, Australia's plan, there's not a direct equivalence with what Australia did, but there are some similarities. And, you know, even migrants in Australia that were picked up on boats and put onto one of the islands outside Australia, even if you were given the right to remain in Australian territory, you never made it to mainland Australia. You were sent to another part of it.
Yeah, and this is what we should have. We should have an offshore processing centre, whether it's a floating one or whether it's a piece of land or whatever. These people should never hit mainland Britain.
It seems extraordinary to me that we have... I don't know why we haven't done that. Somebody will say, well, you know, let's take an island somewhere off the Cornish coast or off the northeast of Scotland somewhere, an island where nobody really lives, but you'd have to then set up some level of infrastructure so that you don't starve people to death. Nobody wants to do that. So is it that? Is it because it's too expensive?
No, if it was run by the military, it would be done in a heartbeat, same as these Nightingale hospitals we had, and it would be run efficiently, mate. Yeah. You wouldn't have all this crap about the union says this and the union says that, and oh, I can't work an 8-hour shift today because my big toe feels a bit wonky. You know, I mean,
if you're a footballer, that's a fair defence, by the way. But any other profession, no. But I suppose I mean, if you take 700 and odd people that have arrived, these are the latest figures we just got half an hour ago from the Home Office. So 1,000 the day before, 700 yesterday. If you look at those numbers, and those 700 people thought they were going to be driven to the northwest tip of Scotland or the southwest tip of England, taken on another boat to an island where there will be a massive barracks with thousands of beds, there will be food, but that's all you'd really get. I don't think those 700 would have made that journey.
No, I don't think they would, mate. I mean...
genuinely, yeah.
Do you remember back in the 70s when the prison officers went on strike and the military were called in to man the prisons?
And what happened?
Well, the prisoners liked it, actually, because they thought we treated them far better than the prison officers.
Interesting.
And I was with the Royal Military Police, and basically we had to go up north to the new prison up in, I think it was Northumbria.
Yeah.
And I was in the Mounted as well, in the Mounted Police, RMP, and we had to go up there for 6 weeks while the prison officers' strike was on, but I mean, the whole...
So it's a long journey on a horse, isn't it?
Say again?
It's a long journey on a horse.
No, you don't have to do that these days, mate. Trucks. But, I mean, the whole difference of attitude of how the military projects itself towards people is totally different to... I mean, I'm not trying to put prison officers down or the institutions themselves, but it's a whole different projection of institution and personnel. And it is responded to in like, because in a lot of ways the prisoners didn't know how we would react if they kicked off. And obviously, if they had kicked off, we would react in a totally different way to city prison officers.
It's a good point. It's a good point. That's a big factor as well, isn't it?
Yeah. So if you created a military processing establishment outside of the mainland, it would be professionally contained.
But every time, even when they've tried to talk about, I mean, even barracks to some people, you know, there's Crowborough and a few other places.
No.
They become controversial.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Crowborough when I was in Army Cadets in the 60s.
Okay, so you know that territory.
So we used to go there on summer camp for 2 weeks every year. But these types of places are not suitable.
No.
They may be former military barracks, but they are not the type of establishment that you want for this sort of processing. You want a completely different type of establishment.
The Labour government are never going to go there, Bob, are they? They'd never do this.
I don't think any of them will, in all honesty.
What is it that's... Is it the breaching of... Because, I mean, are even Reform talking about this, though?
I don't think Reform will do it if they come to power.
Because I can't think of another more instant way.
No, I think what they will do, they'll bring us out the ECHR, which we need to do, but I think they will come back to the establishment game, in all honesty.
But is it a case of saying, like you and I can sit here and have this discussion, if you spoke to some Mandarin at the Home Office or something and said, right, there's an island over there, there's a company that will erect almost industrial scale warehouses that are clean, they are warm, and they can house collectively 5,000 people, as an example. Somebody in the Home Office will say, now, on paper, that looks like it will work, but these are the reasons why it won't. And you can almost see somebody writing the list, Bob.
Yeah, but this is the difference between civilians and military. Yeah. Military think in terms of, we know how to make it work.
Yeah.
We don't look for excuses as to why it won't work. So if you were to say to the military, this is what we want you to house 5,000 people, keep them secure, along with civilian attachments, they will be processed for asylum claims, etc. If they're allowed to stay in the country, they'll be transported out independently. If they're not allowed to stay in the country, they'll be sent back to the EU or whatever. And let the military handle the whole logistical side of it.
Yeah, I mean, you've sold it to me, Bob. I mean, maybe we need to go on Dragon's Den with this one.
Well, I could do with the money, mate.
Yeah, Peter Jones will jump at this. I swear he will. Listen, Bob, you've been brilliant. Love that conversation. Thank you, mate, for that. Bob in Ludlow. The only thing that sprung to mind talking to Bob was that somebody might say you will have a riot on your hands. And if you've got 5,000 young men on an island where there literally is no shops there, okay, there's nothing to do, you can't even go for, in Crowborough, you go for a walk in the high street and pop into Spoons if you fancy it. You can't do that because there's nothing there. Now, that wouldn't last long because the theory being that those in Calais would go, what, there? I ain't going there. I ain't going there. No, I'm not doing that. Would that work? Nobody's tried it. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Just tying into the wider issue of migration, there is something kind of kicking off in Morocco at the moment. Now, there's it's slightly complex. It's an autonomous Spanish city. It's not an island, but it's a city that is located on the north coast of Morocco called Quetta. I think I've pronounced that correctly, Ceuta. So it's located on the North African coast, forms a small kind of enclave enclosed by Morocco. Morocco disputes its Spanish sovereignty and claims territory for itself, etc. But local officials are saying that there's been a kind of almost an invasion, overwhelmingly young, able-bodied men, not refugees, fleeing war. Footage shows, and if you're watching in Vision, you'll be able to see this. These are people that they've got to this what is Spanish territory, even though they were previously in North African territory. They've got into there. It looks like, I can't accurately tell you how many, but based on the pictures we're seeing, hundreds of young men, able-bodied, not refugees, who are making their way into Quetta, this Spanish city connected to Morocco. Whether they are doing this for a laugh, whether it's the summer holidays and they're thinking, hey, now's the time to kick off and show our allegiance to Morocco, that this is not a Spanish place, it's Morocco, or whether they're there for some kind of status, escaping their own country, and are going to claim refugee status in what is Spain, essentially. So we await to see, but we're seeing hundreds of African migrants entering Quetta, this enclave connected to Morocco, but Spanish territory. And that's what's happening right now. And any details on it, we will bring you the latest. It just feeds into what we've been talking about, this changing face of how discerning people are now in terms of where they want to be or live. But the reasons for it, we don't know. But they can get to Spanish mainland, apparently, from Quetta. That would obviously have to involve a boat, wouldn't it, of some sort? Or swim as well, because the Morocco to Spain is a bit like England to France, but I think in certain points it's actually, I don't know what the narrowest point is, but it's not that far, 9 miles. I mean, you wouldn't want to swim 9 miles, but you might do it in a rubber boat. You know, the one you buy from the fellow who sells the rock at Folkestone, one of those with a big inflatable duck's head, I don't know. You'd be able to do it if you really wanted to, is the point. Let's go to Stephen in Manchester. Stephen, what have you got for us? Good afternoon to you.
Oh, good afternoon to you, sir. Demography is indeed destiny, and the political philosopher Edmund Burke said we have a duty of care, not only to ourselves, but to those yet to come and those who brought us here from the past, so that there is that continuity, that route into the past. So it does matter which people you come from. There's a kind of organic understanding amongst the folk that are established and settled. If you keep infusing masses of the other end, it's not a matter of being good, bad, or indifferent, but they are different. They have their
if you bring, I mean, it's the kind of trading places sort of scenario, isn't it? You could take a kid from, you know, a third world country. They could be raised by a middle class family in the UK and turn out to be somebody who, you know, is culturally as assimilated as it can be. The question, I suppose, is, why is it offensive to some people to point out that bringing 1 million people from third world countries into a first world country like ours, and not only that, it's not like 1 million like-minded people from a third world country, it's 1 million people who probably don't speak English, have no discernible qualifications, nothing to add to the picture, and maybe a different value system. You can explore that too. Why do people find that offensive to question that?
because they're mind-washed from the universities down. I was out the other day and there was a lady there preaching hatred about England. She was waving Palestinian flags and so forth. Yep. And I said to her, why do you hate your own? I can see and hear that you're English. You come from a great people. We've been very involved with heritage, culture, tradition, the abolition of slavery. We've given the mother of parliaments to the world. She said, I hate England. I detest it.
Wow.
And they are being trained into this mindset by
There is, yep, it is almost a self-flagellating idea. Listen, I've got to run, Stephen, but you've been great. Thank you very much indeed for that, the change in demographics. Very quickly, we've got the voice of doom. It's the day 5 of the mystery voice. Remember, it's political. It could be left-wing, right-wing, Brit, otherwise, young, old. Who is this?
The men and the women fight.
That's the voice. Let's hear it again.
The men and the women fight.
And again.
The men and the women fight.
Now, if you think you know who that is, 87222. That's 87222. We're on day 5. Nobody got it right so far. If somebody does, we'll spill the beans after the news at 3. If they don't, it rolls over till tomorrow. Here it is again.
The men and the women fight.
87222 is the only way to get in touch, and hopefully we get a winner in the next hour. Meantime, our lines remain open for your comments. 0344 499 1000. Let's get the news at 3 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the home of Common Sense. Loads to talk about here. The French police standing by and watching 1,000 migrants set sail for Britain yesterday, hours after Andy Burnham insisted his small boat plan was working. We've now seen that the figures today are in a similar ballpark. It's just shy of 800 making the journey. This is what Andy Burnham is suggesting success looks like of a policy. You can't make it up. We'll have more of your comment. What's our next move as a country on this? Also this afternoon, Kemi Badenoch has defended her pledge to scrap net zero. She insists the 2050 target is a political fiction bankrupting the country. Well, she's absolutely bang on the bankrupting the country thing. And a major new report is warning that Britain's white British population has fallen from almost 90% in 2000 to around 70% today. With the author David Goodhart arguing that wanting to preserve a majority white Britain is not necessarily a bigoted position to have. We'll talk to David in just a couple of moments. We'll bring you everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. You can drop us a voice note there as well. You can message 87222. Ian in Newcastle says, Bob was saying build somewhere where illegal migrants can be temporarily housed while their asylum claims are processed. Why do they need to be processed? They've travelled through several safe countries where they could have claimed asylum. Pass legislation that if you arrive illegally, you forfeit the right to apply or asylum and will be refused outright and deported. And the problem, I get that totally, what Ian in Newcastle is saying, and this is down to how we change the rules, ECHR and all sorts of other areas. The law as it stands at the moment is you can travel through 100 countries, doesn't matter how many you've been through, you can get to where you feel safest. It might be because the language is more common. It might be that you have relatives that live here, so there is a vague link. It could be that. There's no... you don't have to have passports or papers or anything like that. By definition, if you're an asylum seeker and you've escaped a tyrannical regime or a war in Syria or anywhere else, then, well, it's possible you wouldn't have a passport to hand. So that's the argument as to why it is at the moment. And what Ian is saying, and I think it will be supported by many people, is can we just change a few things there? Because I always think to myself, just objectively, if I had legged it from, you know, certain death from a dictator in a North African country or a Middle East enclave, then frankly, get me to Spain, get me to Italy, get me the southern tip of Europe is fine as long as I'm safe. I don't imagine I'd go, right, now I've got here, Luxembourg, here we come. I don't imagine I'd be discerning under those circumstances. That said, I've never escaped a tyrannical, murderous regime, so who knows? 0344 499 1000. So back to that question. Is it bigoted to want Britain to stay majority white? David Goodhart, the journalist and author, says no in a brilliant new Telegraph column addressing the country's changing demographics. David, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
It's always a tricky one, isn't it, this? Because the moment that you raise the... I was just imagining myself, I live in Sevenoaks, and Sevenoaks is kind of an interesting place because stereotypically people imagine, you know, it's full of old Tories and toffs and people wearing bowler hats as they do the daily commute. But it's actually not quite like that. It's a very sort of Lib Dem type place. I know it's got a Tory MP, but whenever I've raised anything like this, channel migration or whatever, the left-wing meerkats would be up and at you the minute you opened your mouth and said, let's talk about white demographics and the numbers and the dwindling numbers of white people in this country. If you said that, before you'd even got into any kind of intellectual, reasonable details, you'd be shot down. And that's the problem.
No, I think our politics does increasingly divide between those people who think it's legitimate to worry about it, to feel uncomfortable about it, to raise questions about how our society will evolve if it no longer has an ethnic majority. You know, will national solidarity survive? What new forms might it take? And those people who think that it's illegitimate to feel discomfort about it. And I think, you know, as we move, as you said, from a, you know, just 25 years ago, the white British population was about 90%, about perhaps a bit less than 90%. It's now, in England alone, it's probably below 70%. At the last census, the white British was 74%. And we've had the Boris wave since then.
Yeah.
And obviously, we know lots of major cities have long since been majority-minority, you know, London, Birmingham, Leicester, now Manchester, and many others. If you look at the school population, the white British population in schools is now below 60%. So this is coming. And so we need to have a conversation about it, and we need to have a calm, rational conversation about it. The extent, because we are going to be majority minority probably by the mid 2060s. So you know we have to think about how we can, as it were, maintain enough of a common way of life in the country for it to function in the way that it has done, you know, in recent time. And I think that is it. And that then, we need to have a conversation about what is the majority way of life. You know, is there such a thing as the majority way of life? I mean, a lot of liberal-minded people will say, well, they make two often rather conflicting arguments. They say, on the one hand, the majority way of life is so pervasive that it doesn't really need protection. And on the other hand, they might say it doesn't really exist because, you know, if you look at the white British majority, the value diversity, the way of life diversity, is so great that it doesn't really make sense. I mean, I would challenge that. I think there is such a thing. You know, it's very broad and it's hard to define in precise terms, but I think there is such a thing as majority way of life, and you can see that in the way people behave about where they choose to live.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the people from the white British majority tend to gravitate towards places where people like them dominate, and vice versa for minorities. And that's, you know, you can say that's just a kind of a natural human instinct.
I think I've long argued when it comes to, I mean, the issue of immigration, I think cultural assimilation just sort of gets relegated as a factor in this. When you sort of heated debate on Newsnight or something, it doesn't often come up. And I genuinely do believe, David, that I think it's a pivotal part of that debate, and we leave it out at our peril, really, for lots of reasons. I also remember, I'm just reminded of this because of talking about it, watching, I think it was a Panorama where they went to, I'm tempted to say it was Blackburn, which would have been Jack Straw's old constituency. And they'd made a programme there sort of 20 years ago about, I think, a divided part of Blackburn. So you had a very sort of Muslim population on one side and a kind of, for want of a better phrase, the word indigenous is tricky these days, but you take the point, on the other side. And there was, you know, almost a road dividing these two. And they went back 20 years later, whatever it was, to examine whether, you know, these two communities had really come together. And they hadn't come together in any shape or form. They weren't at war with each other either. There was there wasn't really any hard feelings. It wasn't as if you weren't allowed to step into one part or the other. It's just that people had gravitated to, you know, the indigenous side or the Muslim side. So everybody was fine when they bumped into each other. There was no sort of race wars or any of that going on. I'm sure there were some uncomfortable things said in certain places, but generally speaking, the point that was the conclusion really of the documentary was that it was just separate lives, and whether that was a healthy way for a nation overarchingly to exist. And there's obviously more and more of those examples in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, I talked in this Telegraph piece, which actually was a kind of shorter version of something I wrote on my Substack. My Substack is a good heart is hard to find.
Good to know.
But the famous pop song. And the headline for my piece was actually, do majorities have rights in the way that minorities have rights? You know, do they have the right to preserve a majority way of life? And I conclude that it's a very difficult thing to achieve in any kind of legalistic way. I mean, the state should, in a sense, be neutral. You know, the state should have a relationship with individuals, not with groups. But I think it is legitimate to talk about the majority having kind of interests, you know, having an interest in preserving a way of life or seeing it evolve slowly enough for people not to be discomforted by it. And I talk about, I mean, you talk about Blackburn. I mean, I talk about there being a sort of two models of how we are progressing towards becoming a majority-minority country. I mean, one, and you see this in places where where integration has been relatively successful. The minority population, I talk about relatively small, affluentish towns. I talk about Abingdon in Oxfordshire, Sale, Warwick, these sort of places have about, they do have substantial minorities now, perhaps 15, 20% of the population are from ethnic minorities, but they're often, they're places where the minorities have been born here. They speak with British accents. They often marry white British people, and the accommodation is comfortable and easy. And unless you're an extreme kind of ethno-nationalist, no one's going to worry about that. But of course, then you have the Blackburns and the Bradfords, where Bradford is about 45% ethnic minority, and there at least a significant part of the minority population live as if they're in a different country. I mean, they dress, they speak different languages, they go to schools where people like them are kind of 95%. And, it's obviously very difficult now to do anything about those places. And obviously this tends to be worse in Muslim majority neighborhoods. But the Muslim population of Britain is only 6%. I mean, and there are many Muslims. There have been Muslims in Conservative and Labour cabinets who are obviously incredibly well integrated. But there obviously is a sort of special issue with the parallel lives problem among the Muslim minority. You go to places like Tower Hamlets in East London, and they are. I mean, that's the other way of thinking about this is, looking at different areas of the country. I mean, there are lots of areas of the country that remain overwhelmingly white British, Northumberland, I mean, the North East, Cornwall, places like that. And then there are the places that are very, very heavily minority, like the Tower Hamlets and the Blackburns and the Bradfords. And then you've got the kind of in-between places where the white majority is still, as it were, sets the tone for the place, but is absorbing minorities in a kind of healthy way, in a way that doesn't disturb people and doesn't make people feel that they're strangers in their own land and all of that.
It's funny you mentioned Tower Hamlets. I used to have a cab driver that when I did a late show, and he used to take me back from work each night, and he was from Bangladesh, lived in Tower Hamlets. I think Tower Hamlets has got the largest Bangladeshi community outside of Bangladesh. I think I'm right, and certainly in Europe. But either way, I had regular conversations with him about this, and I found it fascinating. And he said to me over many conversations over a couple of years that he said, we keep ourselves to ourselves. We run everything ourselves pretty much. And he wasn't really just talking about Sharia courts and things. He was just talking about a sense of community where whilst, you pay your taxes, you have to adhere to the same road limits and laws and regulations. But as a community, he said, we're kind of our own thing. And I knew what he meant, but I couldn't work out what I thought about it, if that doesn't sound too bizarre. It wasn't lazy thinking on mine. I genuinely didn't know, David, what my thought on that was. Because I thought, well, here's a hard-working guy. He had about 3 jobs, this guy. He was very hard-working, really diligent guy. From a reasonably religious family and in a very positive way, and he was community-minded and gave money to charity and all this stuff. And I thought, this is a guy I'd be perfectly happy to live next door to this bloke because he'd put my bins out if I was on a holiday, all of that stuff. So there was no problem in that sense. But there was something that I thought it felt like a bit of a shame that we have. And Tower Hamlets is not an insignificant borough, as you know. It's a big old place in East London, and I just thought it's a bit strange. What do we do with that information?
Yeah, and how do we? I mean, one can talk. When you talk about a majority way of life, you can list things like speaking the language in an idiomatic way, dressing in the variety of ways that white British people have traditionally dressed, things like, just abiding by broadly similar social norms and so on. But then there's also a kind of, so that's at the kind of micro level in a way, but then there's also the national level of feeling yourself attached to a country and its history. And even if you come from Africa or South Asia, you may have a different perspective on that history. But you're in Britain now, and yes, but bring something of where you've come from, but be on the same team as everybody already here. Think of yourself as on the same team. And marry us. Partner with us and marry us. And that does happen with some groups. It happens very little with British Muslims. It happens very, very little, actually, even with the very successful minorities like British Hindus and Sikhs. It's starting to happen a bit more, but it's like, we're still talking about like 12, 15% of people from these communities marrying people from the majority. I mean, and I think that those numbers will increase over time. But this is also an issue, although the left is often very uncomfortable about this discussion, but I mean, this is a conversation the left needs to have too, because, national solidarity, social solidarity is central to progressive thinking. If you want to maintain a strong welfare state, you need to have a sense of shared experience, some kind of shared identity. And the welfare state, it remains relatively strong. Indeed, it's expanding too fast in many ways. On the other hand, if you look at the polling that is done on these questions of social solidarity, if you go back to like 1989, 1990, admittedly, this was at the end of the Thatcher period, where you'd seen a big increase in inequality and so on. But something like 65% of people agreed that we should spend more on the poor, even if it meant their own taxes rising. You look at that figure today, and it's come down to about 35%.
Yeah.
And I think, that is, it may be just because we become more selfish and individualistic, but I also think it's because we are more ethnically fragmented. You're less likely to think
that's true.
Somebody, the person your taxes are going to is somebody, not necessarily the same skin color as you, but somebody who will kind of, broadly speaking, behave in the same way and feel, a feeling that they're on the same team as you. Indeed. And I think,
plus we're all skint as well, David. There's also that factor. Listen, David, it's a great column. Great to have you on with us. Let's speak again, because I do think this is a fascinating subject, and really good to have you on with us today. David Goodhart, the author and journalist. Check out his Substack as well. When you say Goodhart is hard to find, I think he said it was called. And you can check out his column as well in The Telegraph, addressing the country's changing demographics. Our lines are open. We'll go back to your calls. Loads of comments on the way. 3:20. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk, 23 minutes after 3 o'clock. Fafa says, what other country gives illegal migrants everything on a plate? I bet we're a soft touch. Freebie Britain is the only one. We're a laughingstock. Well, the odd thing about that is that if you go to most countries in Europe, it's not a dissimilar deal. In fact, I think France, Germany and Spain all give more money to those that are awaiting asylum claims. So, but I don't know what they do I don't know what the accommodation thing is going on over there. I mean, obviously we talk about Northern Calais, but that's migrants that are trying to get to this country. But if you turn up in Paris and you or flee across, from wherever and say I'm claiming asylum, I don't know where you go in France. Have they got? Is it a hotel thing, or have they got some other kind of system? But you absolutely get accommodated. You definitely get fed, and you definitely get given money. It's not a living, but it's not a living here either. Unless you've come from somewhere that's an absolute hellhole, then, yeah, every day of the week you'd take it, wouldn't you? So it's a good question from Fafa. And arguments prevail as to, which country is more generous than anyone else. And Macron talked about, the UK's got to get rid of the pull factor. Fine to say that, but France has a massive problem with what they would also call illegal immigrants. Massive problem. And so do many other countries as well, most of them in Europe. In Spain, they've just got some scheme where they're allowing the right to remain for, was it 500,000 people or something? Mick's in Southend on the changing demographics of the country. What have you got for us, Mick? Afternoon to you.
Hi, I always enjoy your show.
Thank you, Mick.
I'm saying to your research, I actually grew up in the neighbouring borough to Tower Hamlets as a child, Newham or East Ham. And in 1974, I was age 10, and I went to a nice primary school, and the school was mainly what I'd recognise as British kids. Mm-hmm. There was one very nice black guy I got on very well with. But then 50 years later, in 2024, my nephew went to exactly the same school. And my brother decided to take him out of that school and move from the area, because there'd been a complete role reversal. He was the only child in that class that you'd recognise as a British child.
Right.
So a complete turnaround within 50 years.
And did that affect?
And
you may or may not know the answer to this, Mick, but did it? What was the? Was it because he stood out as a white kid, or were there other reasons why he felt, isolated in that environment?
I think it was also what he was witnessing in the borough. A lot of crime, a lot of disrespect in the area. He would openly see migrants dealing drugs down his street. So I think the whole picture got to him, and he decided to move to the northeast. And I've also I used to work in sort of maintenance environment, and I visited another school again in East London. I looked at one of the classroom walls where the children had drawn pictures of themselves. And I looked at all the names underneath, and I went through the whole class. I could only recognise one name that I saw as maybe possibly British. And funny enough, the child was called Elvis. And I said, "What's Elvis? Who's Turkish?"
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so, but I think the other thing is, I remember when I was a child, you'd speak to your friends and say, "Oh, Billy Dad is a copper, and my dad worked in the docks, my mum worked in the fish and chip shop." I think perhaps there isn't that discussion amongst kids, because a lot of the parents don't work.
It's like our last guest that we were talking to, which has obviously prompted this conversation. It's interesting what we do with that, because we live in a world now, aside from immigration itself, the actual numbers of people compared to 20, 30 years ago. But, we do live in a world where people travel around more than, it would have been unthinkable if you lived in North Africa that you'd come and live in the UK. Now, that's not unthinkable anymore, right? You just look at social media and think, oh, it's doable. All I need is 70 quid. I got an air. I'm talking about legitimate people here. I'll go and live in the UK. There's a few chances there. So the world has sort of got smaller, right? But it doesn't explain away your concern, which was our previous guest concern. I think we all share it. I don't know what the answer is, Mick, and that sounds a bit rubbish, but I don't know the answer.
Nor do I. And I think part of the problem the British public think, well, I don't know now, who's going to give us the answer? I don't think the government's going to give it. It is. I think it almost needs to be treated as a national crisis, and you know, money sent of it. And I think the guy made a very good point about actually physically turning the boats round in international water. Well, why not do it? I think we need to get tougher. We just need to make a stance. But I can't see Mr. Burnham doing that, you know, and he's just throwing money at the wrong things, including his crash pad in Manchester. I just think I feel like the country has gone absolutely potty at the moment, and a lot of my friends feel the same.
It does seem potty when you're spending a lot of money on stuff you don't really need to spend money on. And, you know, the migrant thing, the hotels, it's not just the hotels and the journeys and the facilitating and the legal process, which we pay for all of that. It's the healthcare, it's education eventually, and all that. I mean, it's a massive, massive bill, and one we shouldn't need to have to, you know, I understand helping somebody out, you know, when Ukrainians were looking for a safe place, most of the continent of Europe stepped up, including us, and said, we get it, we understand it, it's a flipping crisis, Putin's gone nuts with his tank, so yes, we will help. We all get that, but there is a very real feeling, for an obvious reason, that we don't think that's what's going on with the channel, right?
No, and I just think that I think most of the public feel that nothing is happening. You know, when you reported 700 yesterday, 1,000 the day before, you think, well, how is it? You know, you actually think, well, how is this happening? You said it's not. You know, why not just stop it? Something drastic needs to happen. But unfortunately, I don't think Mr. Burnham's the man who's going to.
No, I think you're absolutely right. But you know, if he did do something, at least it would. I mean, he's a guy that might well call a snap general election at some point in the next 6 months. So you'd think if he wants to win it, he's got to do something about this. We will see. Mick, thank you, mate, for that. Mick in Southend. 0344 499 1000. Jason in Whitby says, can we talk about immigration until we can talk about it until we're blue in the face? What's happening in the West is by design, or it would have been stopped. I know that's often said as well. Jason, thank you for that. Our lines are open. We're back with more from you in a couple of moments' time. Or we can do the voice of doom here. Should we do the voice of doom? I think we should do the voice of doom. Have we got a winner? Let's have a listen to the voice.
The men and the women fight.
The men and the women fight. These are some of the guesses. Winnie Mandela, no. Uri Geller, the old bender, no. Is it him? Definitely not. It does sound a bit Uri. What? Did the spoons, Finn? The spoons. Let's have a listen to it again.
The men and the women fight.
That does sound a lot like Uri Geller. That's right. Pre-bend. Officer Crabtree. Who's Officer Crabtree? He's obviously a character from... I'm tempted to say something like Top Cat or something. Oh, hello, hello. The sitcom. No, it was Officer Dibble, wasn't it, in Top Cat? That was a great cartoon. By the way, I went to the cinema the other day. They said they're making they've made a movie of Roadrunner. Did you see that? That better be good, because Roadrunner is one of the greatest cartoons ever, and it's not really talked about. Up there, Tom and Jerry, Bugs Bunny, all great in their own ways. Roadrunner was another territory. Ellen Johnson, no. Kira Ruddick, no. Benazir Bhutto, no. Daniel Hagari, no. But we have got a winner, slightly annoyingly. Michael in Birchington. Birchington's down there in Thanet, isn't it? Can we hear the voice again, Sam?
The men and the women fight.
That is Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro. We thought that was going to go on forever. I think it's unlikely your brain would think we had a voice clip of Fidel. I don't think I've ever heard Fidel Castro fight. Must have been... Was it a younger version of him? I don't know. I don't know when the clip was taken. But there he is, the old mad dictator himself, Fidel, the darling of the left to others. Fidel Castro is the right answer, which means we have a brand new Voice of Doom starting tomorrow, right here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk 25 to 4. Very excited. Sean Keach is with us. Sean is Head of Science and Technology over there at the Sun. Good to see you, Sean. We've got some...
Good to be here.
And I'm excited because you brought some goodies with you, which we'll explore in a few moments.
I have brought goodies.
Folding phones, all right? No, not the new iPhone, but folding phones. We touched on it last week.
We did. The new iPhone might look like one of them.
Yeah, but which one? We'll find out more in a moment. There's not a week goes by where we don't talk about AI. What I think is actually the story of the year, it's such an interesting story to me, we'll come on to in a second. It involves books. But first, how safe is AI in terms of the chats that you might have with them?
Yeah, so there was actually a big story this week where people's private chats were being exposed on the open web, which when you're chatting to AI about your finances or your children or your mental state, you probably think it's fairly private, but not necessarily. So when you go on Google, you can do this thing called a site search. If I put in, say, site:"The Sun," I could then look up something like cheese, and it would show me all the times that the Sun has written about cheese. Yeah. Well, people worked out that they could do this with the Claude chatbot, and so they could put in site:"Claude," and then find a long list of chats that people had had with the chatbot. Private chats about health information, kids' phone numbers were on there, and even one erotic conversation was exposed.
So it wouldn't have necessarily somebody's name who...
No, unless that was in the chat. So it's not necessarily identifiable.
But the point is, in the chat, you could have something identifiable, couldn't you?
Absolutely. And people didn't know this was happening. And so it didn't happen to every chat. It only happened to chats where someone had created a share link for this. So if I had an interesting chat, I created a share link for that and shared it with you. I wouldn't necessarily expect that to pop up on Google, but it was. So the chats have now been removed from Google, but about 200 conversations were exposed.
So that could be... I mean, I'm thinking of Finn, our producer, you know. I mean, he once did a chat. He had a weekend, you know, lovely weekend as he does, came back and he was just looking, I won't say too much, for some ointment on a Monday. And, you know, he mentioned in there that I work in the radio industry, I produce an afternoon show, so I have to sit down a lot. So from that, you could have extrapolated... Well, it's our Finn.
I think I read that conversation.
You read it as well,
Google.
yeah. That's how I found out about it. It just sort of popped up.
I felt very bad. I meant to message Finn about it. I
set a reminder for all sorts of things Finn related. It's amazing what pops up on my phone on a Monday morning. It's amazing. Did Lucy ever get back to you, by the way, Finn? I did get him the best birthday present, though. So that's interesting. So they're now onto it, are they? And, I mean, would Claude, I would have thought, would have said, hang on, we don't want this to be the case.
It's actually a slightly tricky situation because you think that it would be Google to blame because they're showing these links. But actually websites, you know, if I run a website, I can tell Google not to index my website. I can say, don't look at it, don't include it in your results. And it seems like there was a bit of a miscommunication here where maybe that didn't happen.
Let's talk about AI in a different form. AI buying up all the books in the world. What's this about?
This is terrible. This is going to just sound awful to everyone. I honestly believe
this is one of the best stories. It should be in more outlets, this story. I think it's an incredible story. What's happening?
Yeah, it's terrible. So AI, obviously, when they're trying to train these models, they need immense amounts of information, which is increasingly difficult to get their hands on, because obviously in this race to make the AI as good as possible. And so they're turning to physical books. Digital books have proved problematic for a couple of reasons that I'll get onto in a second, but they're basically snapping up all of these books from bookshops. I think City AM did a piece about how London bookshops are having to provide books for people. It's happening all across Europe, all in America. They're just buying huge chunks of books to train the AI models and are actually destroying them in the process. Now, the problem with when because you might think, well, there are loads of books online, why can't they just train on those? Part of the problem is that some of those books are written themselves by AI, so that corrupts the model when you're trying to train on it. It sort of creates this circular loop and the model collapses, which is terrible. And then you have this other problem where copyright. If you're just scooping up loads of books online, that creates a copyright issue. And so Anthropic, which is one of the big AI companies, was actually sued and I think had to pay something like $1.5 billion in fines to authors for basically effectively pirating 7 million books, which is pretty terrible. So there's this weird copyright law that they're using to get around it in America, where if they buy the physical book and then copy it online and then destroy the physical book, they've technically just modified their copy. They haven't multiplied it. They haven't got a physical copy and a digital copy.
So you've got to buy it online first.
They've destroyed the physical copy, and then they have their virtual version that they can keep, and then that's not technically piracy because they haven't got two copies anymore.
Because I read this in one of two ways. I mean, firstly, you're right. The City AM did a piece on it, and there was some suggestion that these tiny little antique boutique bookshops that sort of owned an original copy of, I don't know, some Charles Dickens thing that had never really been released, would cost you about 20 grand to buy. The companies were buying them up.
Yeah, they're paying them no question of price. They're just like, we'll buy them. And they're using intermediaries, these other like sort of shell companies that are buying the books for them.
Because apparently when the book company said, sorry, who's this for? They didn't hear from them again. So they take this old antique book, take it to the Anthropic or wherever headquarters, tear out the pages.
Yeah, so they basically
scan it,
chop off the spine of the book because then the pages can be processed more quickly. They stick it in this big industrial scanner and then they just sort of recycle the waste.
And then they destroy the book. So this is book burning in the 21st century.
Is it Fahrenheit?
Fahrenheit
451. I think it's 451.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
it's exactly the same where they all have to.
Model,
the firefighters don't put out fires; they burn the books because they think it might corrupt people with confusing ideas, which is very similar to this, I suppose. The AI gives us the information we need, and then all the books are gone.
Well, I thought the reason they wanted the information wasn't about being like the next Amazon, so they could say, we've got all the books. I thought it was a reference point. So if you were to say, is there a quotation in a novel anywhere written in Hungary between 78 and 98 that references Oliver Cromwell's underwear, is it there? And it could say, yes, it can, because they could show you the book clip. But Faith, one of our producers, was saying, is this about just having the actual books?
Yeah, so some of it is having the information to reference, but it is also tied into one of the arguments they're using, where effectively, if I was to read lots of books, that would make me a better writer. And so they're saying, well, if a human can do that, why should my AI not be allowed to do that as well? If I'm training an AI to look at all these books to learn how to write, that is totally fair use. It's just looking at books and then becoming a better writer. And so they're saying, if humans can do that, why can our AI models not do that as well?
Donald Trump has got involved in AI as well.
Well, he's obviously quite panicked about all of this. I mean, you remember last week I talked about how one of the AI agents had gone rogue, basically broke out of its cage and hacked into a company to find an answer very quickly. That has spooked pretty much everyone in the world, and rightly so. And so Donald Trump has said that he's going to look at increasingly cracking down, regulating AI systems. I mean, it's very light on detail, as is often the case with Trump. But it's interesting because it's not quite a U-turn, but he has obviously been very nervous about regulating American tech companies. In fact, he's threatened other countries who have threatened to regulate American tech companies. He doesn't want to frustrate their ability to conduct business. But I think even he is like, public sentiment is very negative towards AI at the moment. And when you have AI models going rogue, it's not very good.
As we discussed
and then the book burning, the book destroying thing, not good.
Indeed, you can see the sort of dystopian parallels that people are drawing. But Mark Zuckerberg, he's taken it down another route where, again, this is often an argument that AI is not your enemy, it's your friend. And if you stand in the way of it, you're stopping progress. And at some point, AI itself will recognise that you were one of the ones that stopped the progress, because Zuckerberg has gone, actually, we can use this for health-related issues.
Yes, he thinks that it's going to resolve our finance, our health, our sort of personal relationships with other people. He wants everyone to basically have a personal AI agent. So we talked about the AI agent breaking out, escaping. AI agents primarily at the moment are used by people coding, so it's like a nice helper that will help you code. He wants everyone to have their own personal agent in the same way that you might have a smartphone and you might ask, Alexa or something questions. Sorry if I just triggered anyone's devices. He wants everyone to have these personal agents that can go out and maybe, sort out your bills for you, arrange your doctor and dentist appointments, all of this stuff. I think it's going to be tricky to get everyone on board with that, frankly.
But you can see how that would be an obvious route for AI to go.
Oh, absolutely.
It would look after you, and we'll get to the stage where, and I'm sure you can sort of do it anyway. You sign up to an AI, you've got a login and all the rest of it, but then that will become a bit more. It'll become like your account, your own personal account.
Yes, and it'll learn you, and it'll learn what you like, and it'll know that if you've got a vegetarian son, for instance, and you're booking a restaurant, it'll know to put that in the in the request when you're booking your restaurant. So, I think they are going to become more common. And actually, I don't know if you ever use it, but the iPhone feature that vets unknown callers before they ring through to you, that is technically an AI agent, and I think that is fabulous. You know,
I haven't switched that on.
Have you not? I think it's so good because you can basically type out and ask questions about who they are, and it'll pop up with the message saying, "Oh, I'm calling you from, I don't know, Nigerian Prince."
Oh, he's back. Yes. The Nigerian Prince is back. Let's talk about the world of cars, because Ferrari have finally dipped their toe into the world of electric vehicles, but there's a price tag.
Which is, it's not what you would expect from Ferrari, I guess, but they've done an EV. I see it on the screen. It's called Luce, and actually it's very controversial because it just looks a bit weird. I mean, it's $640,000. That's about £480,000. Yeah. It's actually designed by Johnny Ive, who's a famous British designer. He famously designed. He was Apple. He famously worked on the iPhone. He left in 2019, and he set up this design company, and he worked with Ferrari on this. People think it looks a bit rubbish, but actually it's selling relatively well. They've sold their initial 500 car allocation for this. Apparently very popular with China and people in Silicon Valley, which does not surprise me. I think it doesn't look wonderful. I mean, the interior is okay, I guess, and it's probably actually our best look at what the Apple car might have looked like. Apple was working on a car for about 10 years. I think they spent something like $10 billion on it. They scrapped it a couple of years ago. So, the fact that Johnny Ive would have worked on that and now has worked on this, maybe this is what it would have looked like.
Yeah, a lot of, when this was first released, this news, a lot of Ferrari diehards and petrol heads said this is a national scandal.
It just looks a bit odd, and I've seen like other people make renders of what it could have looked like, and they look so much better.
Yeah,
but I know it's just a bit podgy.
But you'd think podgy is a good word. Actually. It looks more like a Peugeot than a Ferrari.
It doesn't look like a Ferrari. Ferrari's so iconic. They've got such aggressive design language, and this, I don't know, it looks like something you go to Tesco in.
Indeed. Let's talk about folding phones, because you bought some. We talked about these last week, and you bought sort of 2 or 3 different ones.
Which one do you want first? These are the 2 new Samsung phones, and they both bend. Which one do you think is more expensive?
I would suggest, well, you'd think the one on your right hand, but you're going to tell me it's the one in your left hand.
No, it is this one. It's the taller one is more expensive. This one's $18.99. This one's £16.99.
That's not £16.99.
And they both bend. I mean, I'll bend this one for you now. This one opens up, as you can see.
Can I have
it turns
a
into a little tablet. There you go.
Let's have a look.
So that is the more traditional foldable phone design. So it's like the one that we had last year. That's the Galaxy.
And then you open it up, and you've just got yourself
a tablet,
a better screen.
And you can see that one's 4.1 millimeters thin when it's opened. And if you look on the bottom at the USB-C port, that is now the limiting factor. That's why it can't go any thinner. Is because it needs to still have the charging port, so it can't go thinner than that. But you can see it's almost as thin as the charging port, which is pretty mind-boggling.
That is. Is this got your stuff on it?
No, I set it up, but it's not got. You can have a play.
I just wondered, because I didn't want it. It's trying to log me into Facebook in an update for some reason.
Read all my messages.
Let's get over to I mean, so that's the.
And what's interesting actually is, when you're taking selfies and you always have to use the rubbish front camera.
Yeah.
With this, because there's a screen on this side too, you can see your face on this side, and you can take a selfie using the proper camera. So if you really like your face, this is the phone to buy. Now this is slightly cheaper actually, but this is probably the one that the iPhone is going to look like. It's more passport shaped, and I actually think it feels nicer in the pocket. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a bit. Finn just says it's like an old DS, and it is a bit.
Yeah, it is. I think it's quite a satisfying shape. And also,
it's unusual. You're not used to phones that shape, are you?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Like phones, they're so tall now, and you can struggle to reach the top. I mean, even on this one, like struggling to get your thumb up to the top corner. Whereas with that, you can really reach the edges of the screen quite easily, and I think it's quite a nice shape.
I'm just thinking about, and you wouldn't know when you get to the. When you get to the screen, you can't really see a fold.
No, and certainly if you hold it straight on. I mean, even with this one, I don't know whether. If you hold it straight on, you can see there's not really a visible crease. It's really pretty impressive. And, they're rated for tens of thousands of folds, so it shouldn't break unless you go a bit mad with it, I guess. But they're pretty durable.
Yeah. What do you think, Finn? How'd you get a case on it? Do you remember that came up the other day?
This is the problem, is putting a case on it. I don't know even if you could get a sensible case on this, but ultimately they're phones very rarely break now when you drop them. I drop the phone all the time.
But you've been given, a tangible increase in screen.
Yes.
And I think that plays to my likes. I like it open. I'm not so sure about it shut.
And then, you know, I suppose this one, it feels more like a normal phone, but the fact that you can have this and you can, you know, watch talkTV on it in full size, full fidelity.
What is next, though, for phones? Are they just going to fold again? Will it turn out to be one of those little paper things, you know, when you do the name on it, and you just open it up and it's a...
There is a triple folding phone that you can get that folds out into 3. So, I mean, it really... I mean, China is coming up with some mad stuff lately. I mean, the problem is that smartphones have been boring for a while, but they still want to keep selling you phones every year. So they keep bringing out new models. They all look the same. Finally, smartphones look a bit different, which is exciting for me as someone who reviews phones and ran out of ways to describe
I was going to say, how much more, though, can we improve phones?
I mean, it's very different. I mean, like I say with this one, I mean, it's hard to get it much thinner than the charging port, because that, I mean, unless you switched purely to just wireless charging.
Has this got a different charge? Oh, no, it's got a USB-C.
Yeah, I think at some point it's just going to become smart glasses and then chips in our brain.
Yeah.
Which is maybe a bit sad. I don't know. You can read all of these destroyed books with your brain chip.
Yeah, I mean, Elon Musk is all about the chip in the brain, isn't he? For his neuro kind of medical research.
And I mean, you know, there's lots of hope that can give to people with disabilities. But I think smart glasses are the thing that people are betting on as the next way of interacting with the digital world.
Okay, so you go all over the world. You go to these tech events. You go to these launches. You get invited to, you know, to the HQs of these big companies. If they said, right, Sean, we've got the new chip in the brain coming out next year, it's really, really simple. You just stick it in the back, and all you've got to do is think about your contact list and, you know, do something with your eye, stick your thumb up, whatever it happens to be, a little phone movement or whatever, and your phone starts to ring. But it's got to be a chip.
No world in which I'm putting a chip in my brain. I don't know. Maybe I'll eat those words in 20 years. But
would you put a chip somewhere else? It's not meant to be a saucy question. But
I suppose if it was in your hand, maybe it would feel a little bit better. But I don't.
You know, there's a bit of skin between your thumb and your finger. You know, there's chips you can get the shape of rice. I think there's a Norwegian company that staff can opt for it. You can open your doors and it's your pass around the building.
I don't have huge amounts of faith in tech companies to do the right thing. I trust them to make money, but I don't trust them to do the right thing. And so the idea of putting them in me, I find difficult to bear as an idea.
Yeah.
Maybe some people will. I mean, I'm sure some people have already used Neuralink early prototypes. I don't think it's for me. I'm happy to have my tech outside of my body.
Yes. Yeah. Walking into a phone shop and somebody saying, "Do you want chips with that?" would be a whole different kind of experience.
But some people might want you beamed into their heads 24/7.
Yeah. It's disturbing. But wearable tech is definitely, you know, glasses and the rest of it. That's, you know, watches.
Absolutely. I mean, I use my Apple Watch every day. I think it's so good. It's great for the calorie tracking. You see a lot of people with the Aura rings as well. You know, the ones that you wear.
Do you know what I use my Apple Watch for? The time. I can tell the time.
That's good. It's like it's like how people forget that they can use their phones for phone calling.
That's very true. Phone what?
Phone calling.
Can you still do that?
That's strange.
Wow. Sean, thank you. Check out Sean's column and all the other stories we've talked about and more over there at thesun.co.uk. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is indeed Talk. This is Mark in lovely Lincolnshire. Mark, what have you got for us? Afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Ian. Yeah, what have we got for you? Well, what do you want to talk about quickly? You had your chap on talking about demographic change earlier, which was an interesting one, especially coming from the Telegraph, given that they've done nothing but run hit pieces on Restore Britain, and the fact they have nationalists who care about the demographic change in the country. You know, it's a little bit strange, but...
Well, no, I mean, that's just it's one columnist who has a view, right?
Well,
who's written a column for them.
Yeah, it kind of came across a bit like a civic nationalist take on nationalism, really. Right. That's how it came across to me anyway.
That's all right.
You know, integration, assimilation, they're done. We've been doing that for the last 5-6 decades. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work. You know, we should know this by now. These people, just like ourselves, will always default to the tribe above anything else at the end of the day.
That's probably true. Are we in a perilous place, which I suppose ultimately is the question, isn't it? He said, look, you know, if the country becomes, by the 2060s, I think he said, minority white, it might only be by a percentage, but that's significant. What do we make of that? Do we just say, well, the world changes, it's how it is, or do we have some other interpretation of that?
The problem, well, one of the main problems here, Ian, is we've spent those same last 5 decades or whatever telling these people that we've brought into the country that white people are the root of all evil, that they're to blame for absolutely everything, whether it's slavery, colonisation. We're the only people that have ever done these things, apparently, and we're so evil, we're so nasty, we're so awful. We need to give the black and the brown people the right to talk, and we must step aside and blah, blah. This is the kind of rhetoric we've been telling these people for decades. So therein lies one of the major problems with becoming a minority demographic within our own country, in that how the hell do you think that's going to go? If we end up in a position eventually where we're essentially ruled by non-ethnically British people, how do you think that's going to go? Because I don't see that in, you know, all this...
Well, it depends when we say... Yeah, I mean, it depends whether there is a cultural, religious kind of angle to that. That's where I think it gets really interesting and for interesting read, potentially disturbing. Very quickly, Mark, 10 seconds.
Absolutely the case. The reality is it is not acceptable for us to become a minority in our one and only ancestral homeland.
And I don't think many people would. When you put it like that, I think most people would say, yeah, it's a fair point, and one we'd apply to people in other homelands as well. Fair point. Thank you, Mark, for that. Mark in Lincolnshire. Kevin O'Sullivan's here on the other side of the news. Kev?
Hello, mate. All right?
Yeah, good.